right, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started here. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for coming out to Rocky Gap. Thank you to Senator Edwards for our host here. Appreciate the opportunity to be out in Western Maryland. And so we'll just go around and introduce everybody. I'm Charlotte Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council and Chair of this task force.
Addie Eckert, State Senate.
Johnny Mounts, House of Delegates, Talbot, Dorchester, Caroline, and Wacomico counties.
Sarah Dahl, Choptank Electric Cooperative.
Cheryl DeBerry, Garrett County Economic Development.
Meredith Donahoe, Rural Maryland Council.
Jonathan Favorite, Communications Electronics.
Guy Winterberg, Tri-County Council for Western Maryland. I noticed we're in a room that's like half the size of any other room we've had, and we've now got a microphone.
Matthew Dreyer, Department of Information Technology.
Good morning, Juliana Albowitz, representing U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen. Good morning, George.
Good morning. Heather Graham, Assistant Director of Economic Development for Frederick County.
Nathaniel Watkins, Garrett County CIO.
Bill O'Brien, T-Mobile.
Kristen Sullivan, Harford County Budget.
Scott Warner, Midshore Regional Council.
Drew Van Dopp, Maryland Broadband Cooperative.
John Lyons, Assistant Director of the Governor's Office of Rural Broadband.
Rick Gordon, Director, Office of Rural Broadband.
Is this even on? Oh, Brian Roach, Bay Country Communications.
George Edwards, State Senator, District 1, Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington County. I want to welcome you to Mountain Maryland, Midwestern far Maryland. You got to go a little further being far Western Maryland. I want to welcome everybody here. Hope you have a good stay. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody, and welcome. The microphone, we are streaming live, so we do have folks that are watching. And the microphone's not to amplify. It's to pick it up so that people can hear us over the internet. So with that, I guess we'll get started on the agenda. You have the minutes from the last meeting, August 16th, when we met down at the Maryland Association of Counties. We sent these out yesterday. Folks had a chance to take a look. All right, thank you. The minutes have been motion for adoption. Is there any discussion, any corrections? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Great. All right, thank you. Well, first we'll start off with our speakers. So Mr. Rick Gordon with the Office of Rural Broadband.
Hello. So where are we? Last month reported that the asset mapping had started. We are starting to get information from the various state agencies. Actually just got all the water tower information from DNR. So that's actually county information that DNR collected. Or I'm sorry, not DNR, Department of Environmental. Yesterday we received responses to the RFI, the request for information that was sent out to the counties. We got 9 responses back from counties. So we're going to start going through those and figure out who we want to partner with. That RFI was basically with the office's assistance to help the counties apply for USDA's e-connectivity program, loan grant program that's coming out. We'll use part of our $2 million allotment for that assistance. John Lyons was also hired as the assistant director. John's going to be helping me hopefully work with the counties and get things straight for those applications. We also have put together a draft budget I'm going to be leaving at noon today because I have to go back and defend my request. We're asking for approximately $15 million a year for the next 5 years. The 4-year is what's going in right now. that will create Maryland's own loan grant program, and also aim primarily at counties, but the counties that aren't interested will probably then turn and look for local providers to help with that, but that'll be a couple years down the road. So that's everything for me.
Any questions? Great. Looks like you guys are making some progress. Awesome. Next on the agenda is Mr. Matthew Dreyer, with Department of Information Technology.
Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to say how pleased I am to receive your invitation and to meet with you all today. It is great to be here to learn more about rural broadband. My name is Matthew Dreyer, and I am the State Information Technology Resource Sharing Program Manager. I've been in the job managing the program for almost 60 days. Before that, I worked for the Maryland Army National Guard, where I continue to serve as a commissioned finance officer. My main goal today is to inform you that Maryland has a resource sharing program with a long and positive history. We view the opportunity to share resources in order to achieve our overall communications objectives as one of important mutual benefit. I'm very enthusiastic to learn more about rural broadband and the opportunities and how resource sharing can support our goals. So if anyone would like to learn more about resource sharing, I welcome the conversation. Thank you.
So are there any questions from the group that you've got, particularly from the ISPs? I'm looking at you guys. You're the ones that work mostly.
Yeah. Can I answer a hypothetical question or ask a hypothetical? So welcome. Good to meet you. We actually have an existing resource share with Department of Information Technology that goes back years. And I did have a question in a scenario where I'm a small provider. We found a nice niche building, say, fiber interconnects for municipalities and some things that are sort of anchor institutions or public facilities like DoIT specializes in. But there's sort of a fine line we find between DoIT's ability or interest in serving, say, like a city hall or a local tower or something like that. And typically, because they're small, they defer to private entities, just like DoIT does with Skyline, their relationship and other vendors. So in that case, I guess my question is, there are DoIT assets that may serve some of these, be it a conduit or existing fiber, and fiber is precious, I get that. I mean, you don't want to use it if you don't have to. But say, for example, in a conduit scenario, where the municipality would be the customer, but they prefer to maintain and utilize, say, a company like ours to do the work for them, just like Skyline does for DoIT, which in that scenario, it's kind of a gray area. Who is the customer? And in the past, and I understand that we were told early on that it would be a legislative act to allow a commercial entity to be a customer of DoIT, per se, or at least to utilize that resource. In this scenario, let's just say there's 3 miles of conduit that has plenty of space in it that the city could utilize to connect something very important to them. They would want to contract with a provider like ours to utilize that conduit. And they would ultimately be the customer, but they would rely on a company with expertise like ours to be able to build the fiber, to maintain the fiber, that would be their exclusive use. It wouldn't be used for, say, commercial purposes, in as much as really just as us as the entity would be doing what private entities do for the state all the time. Is that a scenario that under the existing framework, DoIT resources could be utilized? And you don't have to answer the question right now, but it's really hypothetical from my standpoint, because we don't run into it a lot, but we have run into it, and this is at least the second time where we see an asset that could be utilized. We're not really the direct customer, but we would have to facilitate all that and have the dialogue and utilize a resource for an anchor institution, a municipality, where ultimately It would just be leveraging an existing resource to facilitate that. And of course, yes, we would get paid for the services we provide just like any other state contractor would, or municipal private entity that helped facilitate it. But it's a tricky problem for me, and the fact is I wouldn't even know where to go to ask or to pose the question. So that's just something that, if you got something to take with you or something that we can discuss or something that maybe could be worked on by this, there is an immediate need actually for this that would save, as far as I can calculate, about a 6-figure spend on behalf of a small municipality that we have an existing relationship, and we'd like to do it at the lowest, give them the best solution at the lowest cost, and solve the problem that they have to interconnect some facilities. So.
Understanding how those relationships are importantly defined, because if we're talking about a county in the state, then we would look at an MOU, and if we're talking about a private entity in the state, then we would talk about resource sharing. So if we understand the particulars of the arrangement, and then we can clearly move forward on how to proceed with establishing those relationships. As far as our ability to use this particular strand of fiber, we have a team within the agency who knows and understands the purpose of each one of those fibers, and if they are in fact available, and it is something that we can do a resource share agreement with, we would like to do that. Yep. The same. Yeah, we would definitely entertain the running of the conduit, and so we can discuss those relationships and the best way to move forward with that.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Dreyer? Anybody else?
I have a question for Mr. Gordon. I couldn't make the meeting in Ocean City, but I was in Annapolis at the meeting, and a question was brought up, if my memory is correct. Charlotte, you can help me out here. I forget the numbers. I look at so many numbers, it's hard to remember them all, but how much money is needed to do whatever this group feels needed to be accomplished? I think is the question. I gave her a note after I had to leave early, gave her a note, and I said, well, the best thing to do is figure out how much we need and just go to the governor and ask for it to be in the budget. Is this $15 million you're mentioning that, or is that something else?
The $15 million a year is a number I came up with based on an analysis of what I think the counties need. We've never actually done a true study. So I basically threw a number. It's a $100 million problem across the state.
For rural county?
For rural unserved households.
Okay. Well.
And I differentiate that between counties and areas. So while we have 18 rural counties, there are rural areas in many of the counties. So I do it more based on if the area is rural.
Do we get any federal funding?
So the program that I'm trying to establish has a component for Maryland to have grant money available for these bills. There is also the ability for Maryland to create a loan fund, or the federal government could be used as a loan component. If you go to the federal government, USDA's money right now is 3% fixed for 18 years for a fiber project. If we did the same thing through Maryland's local government infrastructure fund, that would be about 4.5% money. So I'm leaving it up to the applicant to tell me where they want to find their share of the money. If they want to go to USDA, we will support that and help them with those applications. If they want to come to Department of Housing, utilizing local government infrastructure money, we will help them with that process. If they want to do a bond issue on their own, some of the counties can get better rates. We will support that effort. So it's basically, we'll do up to 50% grant. You bring the other 50% from somewhere, and we'll help you with the from somewhere.
Well, I, along with my colleagues over here, fight for rural parts of the state, want to make sure that we're being treated fairly. Rural parts of the state don't have the economic thrust wherewithal as some of these major metropolitan counties do, and don't have the big corporations they do to put money in to help the locals out to build this. And I know very little about broadband. Okay, I can turn my phone on and off and get my messages. Same way with my computer. But I don't think we should be bashful. I think we should find out, and if it's $100 million to do what's needed, I think we should go to the governor, this group as a group. I mean, state put this task force together and say, we need 50 million, we need 100 million, spread it out over 5 years or whatever it is. I'll ask another question, and Guy and Cheryl can help me out on this. Garrett County and Allegheny County just got a couple $1 million, I think, to run a line from Kaiser's Ridge to Oakland, to Western Port, back up to Cumberland, and maybe to Frostburg, I don't know. But they left out a big area, which is Frostburg to Grantsville, which if you're going to have a redundant, or whatever you call redundancy, or have a circle here, you got to have that piece to make it work. There's maybe the name's changed, but level 3 has a line running right through the middle of the interstate from down east clear out to the West Virginia border, and probably further than that into West Virginia, I'm not sure. It was my understanding when that went in that the state kept 2 pipelines that have conduits that have so many fibers in each conduit, and they were reserved for state offices, local offices, but with the idea that hopefully commercial people could get on it. That line runs from Frostburg to Grantsville, right on the interstate. And then you probably can't answer this. My question is why can't, to make this circle, they use that line from Frostburg, interconnect it, and run it to Grantsville to Kaiser's Ridge. The line's already in. It's already dedicated, as I understand it, unless it's changed over these many years, for use by, like I said, local governments, with the hope that you'd have, I know this isn't the correct word, but pit stops, certain places that you can tie in where we have industrial parks, et cetera. So then private businesses could hook into this. So I don't know, maybe Guy can answer this, and are we really pushing this? Guy, where are we at with this? And number 1, and number 2, if we're not, that maybe this group can push the state, who has a contract with level 3 that's been put in now about 20 years plus ago, I'm assuming. Because I think we need to utilize everything we have in place that's available to the state to tap into, for a better way to say it. But I'll go back to what I mentioned to Charlotte when I left the Annapolis meeting. Figure out how much money we need to complete this whole thing and not be bashful, because the big counties aren't bashful, and go to the governor and say, we need 50 million, 100 million, 75 million, we'd like it, and we'd like it spread out over 5 years. I understand you can't do it all at once. To me, that way we put pressure on them, and I think that's the only way and the quickest way we're going to get this whole thing accomplished. With that, I'll keep quiet. I asked Bill if he, or Guy if he can chime in here.
All right, so as one of those people that's normally sitting on the computer, I got to say that this is great because half the time I can't hear what's going on. The second thing is, Senator, you had said you thought we had gotten a couple $1 million. I wish we had gotten a couple $1 million. The way it worked out is we ended up having, I think, almost $250,000 from the state and about $250,000 from the federal government. And so if we're looking to fill a couple hours of time, you got a great topic to do that. As it turns out, we've been working with Do It for this entire project, and Drew, I guess, can speak to the fact that the relationship has been such that you guys have really been a great partner for us. And the topic in terms of Frostburg, I think, is one of those that, excuse me, having some throat issues recently. The topic, as it turns out with Frostburg, is that particular line is one that Drew has been trying to cooperate with. So as the budgets have come in for the last, what you just found out 2 weeks ago, we've got a fair amount of extra money that may actually take care of the situation. I think there's about $150,000 maybe left over. Well, we don't know what things are going to cost, but we know about what's left over, correct?
What Senator, what I want to say about this project in particular is when we put in for the application, we had to base our budget on a worst case scenario in which we didn't have any help from the state. And what ended up happening is we had budgeted about $300,000 in change to build a new backbone lateral between LaVale and Cumberland, which would allow us to light up a fiber path that was built several years ago that goes on down toward Rocket Center. However, thanks to Do It and the work we've done with some of their staff, we were able to leverage a project that they were already doing, and that cost savings is probably north of $200,000. We're also looking for some other savings in the budget in other places. So we're very excited about that. So what we are working with Department of Commerce and ARC to do is to manage the scope and include a new infrastructure build about 9,000 feet up Route 36 into Frostburg to connect with some other fibers that we have up there already as part of the BTOP project. But then to speak more directly to where you're concerned about being able to logically ring services in Garrett County, we're also going to be looking to establish Maryland Broadband's 6th point of presence in Western Maryland, which will allow us to take the fibers that we've been allocated to us, the level 3 fibers that you're discussing, and run them in and out of this new shelter, which will allow us to ring logically circuits throughout Western Maryland. But we don't have all of it. We don't have it all, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to accomplish all of that with the money that's available. Also, you mentioned the level 3 fiber, so I think it would be helpful to clarify the record on how that level 3 fiber has actually worked out. Back in, as you recall, 98, 99, when level 3 did a long-term project with the state of Maryland, they set aside 48 fibers for the state's use at that time. And I imagine in 1999, 48 sounded like a very large number. So there's no criticism of that. That's just how it is. And the state has put aside some of those fibers, and in fact, as part of our resource share agreement where we partner with Do It across the state, Maryland Broadband has 4 fibers along that level 3 trunk that goes from the Pennsylvania border to Kaiser's Ridge and on down into suburban Washington and eventually terminates at the level 3 gateway in McLean, Virginia. which is fantastic, very helpful asset in terms of being able to carry long-haul, very high-speed circuits from one place to another. Unfortunately, it is not a sufficient amount of distribution fiber to easily accommodate the kind of add drop capability along the route that you're discussing. So,
Or inexpensively.
And so, and perhaps that is an area of discussion about how to augment all of the various constituencies' capabilities along I-68 at some point. But if you let me talk too long, I'll spend a whole lot of money. So.
Well, just to follow up on that, my concern is that you've got Frostburg, which is a growing area.
Oh.
And Frostburg State University is kind of the economic engine for out here. It's in Allegheny County. Grantsville's in Garrett County. And Grantsville is one of the economic engines in Garrett County. So to make it even expand more, they have to be hooked together, but they have to be part of this circle, which runs from Kaiser's Ridge to Oakland, to Westernport, to Cumberland, and back, I guess, now to Frostburg, part of that. But to make the circle, you got to have that piece. That's why I'm bringing this up. I don't want to let it sit on the table. I know the guy's been working on it, but we need to keep pushing to get that piece from Frostburg. I guess you would say the Kaiser's Ridge, which is basically Grantsville vicinity. So you can pick up, that's where we got industrial parks. We're going to break ground on the new 219 4-lane highway north in October. So we expect growth in that area to continue, but we need to have this modern technology, and this is part of it. I'm just throwing that out there.
When we initially envisioned this project, Frostburg was included, but the price tag got to be such that it wasn't something that economically either ARC or the state could commit to. I mean, that's just a fact. Money was tight, money's been tight, money's always going to be tight. So what they did with this project was they allowed us to basically do the entire scope minus the Frostburg portion of it, which added a couple $100,000 to the project. To do its credit, really the reason we were able to come in at a lower budget than what we had initially thought, they were able to absorb some costs on a public sector project that mirrored our project between Cumberland and LaVale. And really that is the cost savings that we are now working with, and going back to DBED, I say DBED, I've been around way too long, Department of Commerce, to talk about a modification in the scope, which provided the numbers work out, I think we're going to be able to work out with them. And that was something, it's kind of funny, it's only been in a couple days that we've been talking about this, and we kind of figured we could wrap some of this up while we were up here and talk to Julie. And Steve, I guess, didn't make the trip today, but
Steve had another meeting he had to cover. Julie left with the Department of Commerce. But did talk to Steve on the way up. And so
right.
We are talking to our finance team. We need to make an adjustment to the commitment letter and the contract with the funds.
Right.
And recognizing that where there's a cost savings, so like we've already allocated those funds.
Right, the numbers
those are
for the
gonna
funds.
Stay, and we'll just shift it to add in Frostburg.
right. And seeing ahead a little bit and recognizing that we may actually save some money in the midst of this project through cooperation with the state, I was kind of forward thinking enough that I think we left the Frostburg piece in the ARC grant, so I don't have to necessarily modify their scope of work. And but it was kind of put on there as a, if we have the money, we would. So on the state side, it's going to be a fairly easy change, I think, to be able to do that. And on Drew's side, it's going to be working with his organization and the contractor to find out what it's going to cost in order to be able to do that. And long term, if that rings in place, then Drew has some other options in his pot to try and reach Grantsville. And it's one of the things that I know Senator Edwards is really concerned about, and we want to make sure ultimately that happens.
Well, I'm going to keep on top of this because this is very important to Garrett County and Allegheny County to make this circle. So this $15 million, if we get it, Mr. Gordon, would some of that money be used for this little piece?
The money that I've asked for is for last mile service, but if something like that is needed to enable that last mile to be built and operated, then yes.
So, Rick, I had a question for you as long as I'm standing here with the mic. So, you had talked about doing some loans for projects. Are those loans you're looking to do to ISPs? I mean, would they be the borrower?
Today, I'm focused on the counties. I got one.
Oh,
Yeah. Today, I'm focused on the counties who would then partner with an operator. However, if it turns out that not all the counties are interested in working with us, then I would fall back to local ISPs.
Okay.
So the idea is, because the return on investment is so low in these rural areas, even the small ISPs can't really or don't really want to do it. So if the county builds it and then hires an operator or creates an open network if they want to go in that route, then that's where the smaller ISPs would likely come in and provide the operation and maintenance and customer support.
Gotcha. So do you see DHCD as being the administrator of these loans?
Probably yes.
As opposed to some of the regional places like my organization that deal directly with the local companies for local issues?
The way it's set up right now, if the legislature gives DHCD money, it has to be in DHCD's pot. We would have to create a program to go to the private entities. So
my
it's
concern
a little
is that a
fussy.
local ISP isn't going to find a DHCD sitting down in Baltimore as a place to find this revenue. Because
So-
you're not going to have any money to market this program. That's one of
Right.
those issues that always becomes, you know.
Well, as I said, even for this first one, we got 9 responses out of 23 counties. So that's not a bad reaction. And as word gets out, and it is supposed to be a 5-year program, so word will get out. Obviously, the first respondents are going to be the ones that are really on top of it. And then part of my office's job is to make sure the other counties understand what's going on and can start working towards that. But yeah, right now I think most of the funds would flow through DHCD because they're the state's kind of bank for this type of work. So
Gotcha.
So who's applying? The counties?
the counties right now would be the applicants.
So is this similar to what I think was brought up in Ocean City?
Yes.
The concept of that
Yep.
we have a lot of little petri dishes trying to do their thing in different counties.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Rick, can I ask you a question?
No.
Yeah, I know better than that. So Rick, I'd like you to answer this. When you put together your estimate of 100 million, whatever it turns out to be, what for that 100 million, what did you use as your standard of what is the problem being solved?
Okay, so because there's no hard data, I started with the FCC's 477 data, and that's where I know.
Very brave.
Well, keep in mind, if a provider says they are not offering service, you know there's no service. If they're saying they are offering service, there may or may not be. So I worked off of okay, I know these areas do not have the offer of service. That was my start. That helped me identify counties that had issues. So then I went and I used the FCC's unserved, underserved percentage in rural areas. 30.7% are unserved or underserved. According to their that's 2016 data, not the best data, but it's what I had. And then I went into the census and determined the rural population of these counties. And then I used 30% of that to kind of figure out number of households. Or, well, that gave me population, which using 3.5 people per household, whatever, gave me number of households. Then I used a sniff test and said 12 houses a mile, or as a Maryland kind of average in a rural area. And then I used $35,000 a mile as construction cost for aerial construction. How's that for assumptions?
I think that it's hard to face the blank page.
So, but that's where I came up with the 100 million.
Okay.
And maybe over the next year, that number can be looked at and figured out if that's a good number, but that's what I had to start with. And, you know, in 3 months, they wanted a whole bunch of information, so that's where we went.
One thing I will say is through this whole experience, the resources that we've had available to us from the state of Maryland in terms of the other offices, I honestly think, you know, we walked into this task force almost 2 years ago talking about the need to leverage federal dollars and the need to cooperate. And so this has been a learning experience for me, because it really didn't start off, nobody was real eager to do all this. And, you know, I can sit here a year later and talk about the fact that not only have we cooperated, we've cooperated more than I ever thought we would, really, to get this project done. And we certainly have leveraged those federal resources to their full extent. So, you know, I'm excited about what the future brings. I'm excited about the fact that we've got somebody that's specifically there for resource sharing, because we've got a lot of fiber that's not being totally utilized to its full extent, both for the private sector and for the public sector. So I'm encouraged. And Nathaniel, I mean, you have got your own little private-public thing going on up there, which I think is going to end up being a model in a lot of areas too. So. George, did that answer your question at all? And if you have $2 million, we will take it.
Rick, I have a question. I mean, I don't know whether you can tell us this or not. So I understand that there's $2 million with an RFI, which is the USDA money to access, and that's what went out to the counties right now? Okay. And then if we ask for additional state money, then that will be available as well. So that 100 million, if we get it in the budget, would be at a 4.5% through the Department of Housing. So we'll have two tracks, the 3% and the 4.5, two pots of money that could be used for last mile.
Basically, yes.
Okay.
Yes. If a county wanted to stay local, they would go through DHCD's local infrastructure program to borrow the money. If the county wanted to go to their own bonding, some of our counties have some very good bond rating, they could bring their share of the money that way, or they could go to USDA, or if some magic other program came up, we would always be looking at a grant side from the state to help the return on investment, to help with the costs so that the debt service doesn't get out of line.
Right. So, and based on your assessment, with your underlying assumptions for that 100 million, and the 18 rural counties plus the other rural areas, did the 9 groups that responded, were they very much in that definition?
I honestly can't say because they just came in yesterday.
Oh, okay.
We haven't even,
just curious.
Other than looking and seeing who it was from, we haven't really delved too far into it. And a lot of them did not have costs yet. It's something that we would then have to work on to see how that worked.
They just wanted to get in line.
Basically, they were showing their interest, and that was good.
That's good. Because, and then my other comment would be, one of the things that we wanted to do with this task force was to make sure that we are using every pathway, I'm going to use the broad term pathway, whether you call it a conduit or whatever it is, anything we can do to patch to get connectivity. And then how we make sure that we're using the areas or the, let's see, the conduits, if you will, the places that may be underutilized to be able to get connected, and then be careful of being redundant.
Right.
Like, we don't want to duplicate. If there's already a place that we could work out an agreement to access without stepping on each other's fibers, I guess that would be the word, that we would be able to use that to the best of everybody's advantage, because it ultimately keeps the system efficient and cost effective, from my perspective.
So one of the reasons that DHCD is doing their, I have my own. One of the things that DHCD was charged with by the legislature was creating the asset map, and that's the first step towards that. Actually, ultimately, we would like to include county resources as well as the co-op's resources as separate layers on that map, so that when somebody comes in with a project, we can look at a blanket of different solutions and figure out what might work, what we might be able to piggyback on, where, just to, as you said, to avoid overlap, to make sure that we're being efficient.
Yeah, that would be great to see that on color coding everybody's lines. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you all.
I guess all the legislators are going to ask questions. But Rick, what's for the $15 million this program, this loan program you mentioned this morning? What's the rollout plan for? I mean, it's being discussed right now, and when will we know when that money's available, and when will actions, when will things start to happen with it? And then Senator Edwards was talking about why it's time just to bite the bullet and come up with a plan and just do a major rollout, go all the way, or when they go for the long ball or whatever, to get a complete program in the works. How would you recommend that we would make that request? I mean, would you just say, is that something you just come up and say, hey, according to Rick, we need $100 million, and then go to the State House and say, hey, Rick says we need $100 million, or how do we put that type of an effort together?
So what we're doing right now is it's being put into DHCD's budget as part of the governor's budget, and with special, actually it's a line within DHCD's budget for the Office of Rural Broadband, and it's the number varies between 12 and 18 million a year over the next 5. I use 15 as a round number. And basically what I've tried to establish is, based on my costs, how I think it would roll out with which counties would be first, second, third, fourth. You have Somerset County, which has no information. They're not going to be next year. They're going to be further out. So I kind of tried to establish an order. That order may or may not work, but it was what I used to establish the budget. So some years have 2 counties, some years have 3 counties, basically being assisted. Part of it is also my office can only support so much. It's a small office, so we can't. I can't have all 18 counties in 1 year. I just physically couldn't do it. We'd end up spending $1 million just on staffing and things. We don't want to do that. So, like I said, right now, Friday, there's actually a hearing in front of Department of Budget and Management to go over DHCD's entire budget, and that will then ultimately go to the governor to be presented as just part of the spending request. It's
So your answer is
2020.
2020.
Right. The first $2 million is 2019.
Yeah.
Right. I'm still learning that too. I get confused.
That's a.
But one of the things that we can do, though, is once it's in there and it becomes part of the recommendation from this group and the Rural Council, then all of our communities who would be impacted by that then become advocates.
Right, and I'm counting on that.
And and that begins to build the groundswell to reinforce to the governor and the governor's team that this is essential. And I think most of us have said this 4 years ago. If there's anything we'd like to see happen in Maryland going forward, is to make sure that we're connected. Because when we're talking about sustainability and resilience of our communities, we have to have that network in place. And we have to make sure that we can maintain it over time. So, yeah, Thank you.
So I understand that correctly. If there's, so this isn't until 2020, so between now and next year, the program's not going to be available.
Well, that's the current RFI using USDA's e-connectivity with that first 2 million is 2019's
Okay.
goal.
So we're working off the $2 million that's available
Correct.
from USDA.
Right.
And then the idea is to expand that to 15 million in the following year.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks. So I had a chance to think a little bit. So tell me, Rick, so if I have this right, so it's almost like the presumption is that, and I appreciate it's very hard to estimate an unknowable thing because you either have no data or inaccurate data, right? So.
And we have both.
You have both, and inexhaustible supplies. So, but it sounds like that what the goal is that this is a number that would address the current footprint that is not served by anybody else.
I'm not planning on overbuilding.
Okay. So then, if that's the case, does that mean that whatever is spent to build off of the existing systems would require a significant amount of coordination with those system owners, whether it's the counties or the co-op or the incumbent ISPs?
Sure, and that would be part of the design of a network, yes.
Okay, so an incumbent ISP could participate in the project or in the program to expand into areas that are currently chronically underserved.
Yeah, in fact, one of the partners that has been suggested by, in one of these responses is Atlantic Broadband, that they would be willing to become the operator and expand on it. I know other ISPs that are also interested that this would just be an expansion. They just wouldn't own it. They would just operate. They would operate across it.
They wouldn't own it.
The county would own the facility. They would hire through contract an operator.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but we are, and I'm sure the elected officials are concerned about sustainability.
Understood,
right?
and that's
so
one of ours.
Maintenance and break fix and people calling and being upset, that'll have to be a part of that.
Of the operating agreement, yes.
Anticipate.
Yeah, the reason for it is whoever borrows money, whether it's from the state or whoever receives money, whether from the state or from the feds, has to own the asset. And that's why this model's set up this way. If I'm giving money to somebody, they own the asset.
So is a presumption about this then that at this point we've got the counties that have raised their hand and said they're interested in participating, and then the next phase would be for the counties to determine, to organize all of the various participants, industry participants within their county to say, what do we need and how do we do it?
Yep, with John and my kind of oversight and help, but it's their network. They need to, it's their sweat equity that needs to go into it.
Okay.
So.
If I think of anything else, I'll interrupt again.
I thought you were going to borrow money.
I like grants.
Oh, I thought you had a question. Okay. Does anybody else have a question over here? All right. Any other questions right now? Okay. I did want to. Okay.
Is there a deadline for a report to come from the Rural Broadband Task Force
November 30th.
of this year?
This year. And from you, I started on the draft.
Okay, so should this, well, I assume this report would reflect things we're talking about here and maybe come up with some money. And Rick, I assume you're going to, when you make your presentation, say this is a one-year request with the idea that we're really going to be asking for more, depending maybe on the final report from the task force.
Yeah, and actually what we put together was a 4-year request although it would only be 1 year actually in the budget, but it would show
I
what we expect.
understand, but at least they'll know this isn't it.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else right now? Okay, great. Yeah, we can get, so I did draft a report, just starting it. There's copies in front of folks. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I just wanted to make, I wanted to get back to the FCC because that was one of the impetus behind the creation of this task force, and we were interested in the Connect America Fund 2, CAF 2, the award winners. So I did want to notice that Declarations did receive an award through this federal program just recently. It was just announced, what, last week? 2 weeks ago. So Declaration is going to receive $288,000 to build it out. I have a little map, but I didn't print it out because you can't see it. But you can go online to the FCC website, and they'll tell you where it's going to hit the coverage. And also, Blue Surf in your area received an award for $428,000, and then in Montgomery County, Verizon received an award for $305,000. So there was some federal funds that are going to be coming to rural broadband in Maryland. So we did, we were able to help push the needle a little bit.
Actually, Verizon did spots in about 3 different counties. It was kind of interesting looking at their map because they're just infilling in places.
Yeah. So, and then Declarations also received an award from USDA, and yes, for their network, and they also Garrett Community Action received a RIMPIF award to piggyback off of that project to hook up 200 low-income homes in around Oakland. So we'll get the results from that later this year. So in December, I can share that report with the group and how, what their challenges were. We've heard it all before. It's usually pole attachments, working with the utility, access to rights of way, and permitting have been the challenges, and significantly slow down construction of the networks. So our timeline of a 1-year project for broadband is a little off. It's taking about 18 months to 24 months to get small extensions built. So, and the cost is a little mind-blowing from my perspective, $104,000 for a small quarter-of-a-mile extension in Frederick County. So they are pretty expensive. That's start to finish time, labor, and that's everything. So it's pretty expensive. And then, so next I wanted to turn to Sarah Dahl. She's here today representing Bob Belkey from Chop Tank Electric. We were talking about the electric co-ops and some of their desires to assist with our challenge here. So she's got a little PowerPoint, and I'll turn the mic over to her.
Thanks. Do you want me to flip the slides, or do you want me to? Oh, you can do it there. Okay. So just to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Dahl, and I joined Chop Tank in February of this year as general counsel. And when Bob Belkey retires, I'll be taking over some of the legislative work on behalf of Chop Tank. So I'm very new to the legislative role. I came from Duke Energy and more of a utility compliance type background. So you're not going to hurt my feelings if I'm overly optimistic or missing something or whatever. It's okay. I'm no ego as far as that goes. And of course, I'm new to the task force. So hopefully this presentation is not repetitive of things that you've already spent a lot of time on or know, whether through the task force or something else. But Chop Tank has identified one particular issue, and it is an issue for co-ops across the country. It's discussed on every co-op webinar related to broadband that I've participated in, or every discussion that comes up. And so we've identified this easement issue as something that we would like to see included in the task force report, and hopefully in the next legislative session. And if you look in the draft report, this is basically covered in the last paragraph. The bottom of page 14 is what we have so far in the report related to easements. And so Also, before we even flip to the first slide, I just wanted to say at the outset that Choptank is not particularly interested in becoming an ISP. So we're looking for ways to partner and facilitate the same things that everyone else here is wanting to do. So on the first slide, next slide, our goals are to expand our members' access to high-speed internet, whether it's broadband, whether it's wireless, it's all the same to us. But our board has heard from our members all across the Eastern Shore that this is something that is important to them, and it's kind of the new wave of what cooperative members are asking of their co-op. So we want to make use of the excess fiber that's already installed on our system. So all the discussions about resource sharing and existing conduits, that's exactly what we're talking about with this discussion. And we want to be the middle mile provider, partnering with ISPs, probably by leasing fiber strands to those ISPs, because we've found that one of the big holdups, at least on the shore, is that it's cost prohibitive for ISPs to run their fiber to the most remote regions of our territory. So the other point here, and I don't want to get into the weeds before I've really hit my main points, but the FCC pole attachment regulations do not apply to cooperatives. So our understanding is that even if Choptank Electric wanted to allow Comcast or any other company to attach to our poles to run their own fiber, that we wouldn't be allowed to do that because the rules for the FCC don't apply to us. So just making that point if you care about it, but the main point is we want to be a middle mile provider leasing fiber to ISPs. So on the next slide, this is something that you all know full well, but the population density issues, you really don't have to get very far outside of the major towns and communities on the Eastern Shore to have very little connectivity. So the population density kind of is part of what makes it not feasible for them to run that cable. So next slide. The risk that we see as far as this easement issue is that if Choptank were to proceed with using the fiber that we currently have on our lines or on our poles for purposes of electric service, if we were to use that fiber for something other than electric service, so commercial telecommunications purposes, leasing to an ISP, that kind of thing, the members could potentially bring a class action lawsuit based on a theory of trespass. And it's sort of a theoretical concept. I think you guys are probably fairly familiar with it, but I'll cover it anyway. It's a little hard to get people to understand because you think of trespass as being someone on your property. The poles and the wires are already on your property pursuant to our existing easement. So Choptank has about 42, this is a rough estimate because parcels have been split over the 100 years or 80 years that we've been operating. But we have somewhere between 40,000 and 100,000 easements with property owners and municipalities for electric service on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. All of those easements are somewhat limiting I shouldn't say all. We think that most of those easements are limited to, we can use your property to provide electric service. So on the next slide, you can just see, this is an example. It's kind of small, but this is one of the old ones from, I don't even know, the 40s or something that basically says Choptank has the right to run an electric transmission or distribution line or system on your property. And even the newer easements on the next slide still say that we have the right to put all kinds of equipment on your property if it's necessary for the delivery of electrical energy. So the fiber that we've currently installed is there for reliability purposes. It's there so that the devices on our electrical system can talk to each other and communicate. And it has been a huge thing. It's huge when it comes to reliability, and it's good for our members from an electric utility standpoint. But at the point that we wanted to use that easement for something that doesn't fall into this category, that's when we run into the risk of a lawsuit. And it may feel like a thing that's unlikely to happen, that a member-owned cooperative would file a class action lawsuit against their own entity that they're essentially shareholders of. but it has happened in a big way. And on the next slide, I'm not going to go into detail about this, but there's a little, I can distribute this PowerPoint afterwards if you like. There's a little icon on here that has a lot more detail than this. But there's a co-op in Missouri that did essentially what we are hoping to do. They set up a subsidiary for commercial telecom purposes for, I don't know whether, I can't remember whether the subsidiary was leasing fiber to an ISP or whether they became an ISP, but it doesn't really matter because the easement was held by the cooperative, just like ours are, for the purpose of electric service. And this co-op got into the broadband business in some way. And a very smart, I guess, plaintiff's attorney worked with these members of the cooperative to bring a lawsuit, and the original jury verdict in 2014 was for $79 million, and those damages are based on the fair market rental value of that easement. So in other words, if Chop Tank is leasing the fiber, or in this case, Show Me, where they were leasing the fiber at a certain rate over 10 years, the theory is that that individual property owner should have had a right to deal themselves with a third party, that the co-op with those electric lines doesn't have the right to come in and do that. So the original jury verdict was $79 million. Then the co-op appealed, and the second verdict was $130 million. And the judge actually vacated that damage award by saying that she thought that the jury had misunderstood some of the numbers. And just recently, in April, there was an appeals court ruling that the damage award was, in fact, reasonable. And so that co-op was sitting on the hook for $130 million. And rather than appeal again, apparently Show Me has settled with those members for $24 million. So again, it feels like something that's unlikely to happen. But I think that, and I'm an attorney, so I'm not running down attorneys, but I think that it's a business, and if members of electric cooperatives get letters in the mail that say your co-op doesn't have the right to do this thing that they're doing, this is a discussion that is kind of the elephant in the room in a lot of these discussions about electric cooperatives becoming broadband providers or getting into the game at all.
Just to clarify something.
Yeah.
By suing the co-op, they were suing themselves because the co-op is owned by themselves.
Yes. But there's some details, I guess, but at the end of the day, yes, it's a member-owned cooperative where all profits run to the members.
Expenses as well. So if they can't cover their expenses as a business,
it would
that
bankrupt
goes back
it
to the members.
Well, no, the members aren't really on the hook for the debt. I mean, it would just bankrupt I don't really know exactly as a practical matter how it would work out, but the members get capital credits that are allotted to them and loaned back to the co-op, and they're paid out 10 or 20 or 25 years later. So basically, but you're right, the point being that these individual members got a short-term payout and were potentially bankrupting their member-owned cooperative. So like I said, this is kind of the elephant in the room when co-ops talk about getting into this business, and it makes all of the lawyers think twice before going down this broadband path. So
you're already using the fiber for something else.
It's already
not
there.
Adding a new line.
Yeah, right. The fiber's already there, and in the case of Chop Tank specifically, of course, this lawsuit is in Missouri, but in the case of Chop Tank, we do have quite a bit of excess fiber out there on the system, because when we installed it, it doesn't cost that much more to run 100 strands as opposed to 3 strands. And Chop Tank is making use of it. We're connecting all the way out to all of our individual devices, like switches, and not necessarily homes, but I mean switches and substations and things like that on the system.
Actually, even in a lot of co-ops, they're doing smart meter projects where fiber is actually run to the individual house meter.
And we have that. Our
right.
entire system is smart metered,
So-
but that doesn't mean you have the broadband fiber.
But the fiber is there. To be able to then use it for something else makes a whole lot of sense.
The fiber, I mean, yes, we don't have the fiber. I just wanted to clarify the fact that even though we have smart meters in every Chop Tank Electric member, every Chop Tank Electric member has a smart meter unless they've opted out of the program. And that gives a ton of data and information.
Right.
And that doesn't mean, though, that Choptank has run the fiber to that person's home in order to install the smart meter. That's not exactly how it works. We have the fiber in the middle mile. We don't have the fiber already connected to the homes.
Right.
Just wanted to clarify that.
My point was, should you run fiber to those meters at some point, you now have fiber to every home, but you can't offer broadband off of it based on current law.
Well, that is correct. And I don't know that we have any reason why we would ever, and I don't want to speak beyond the things that I really know about, but I know that our AMI smart meters are working the way they're designed to work without the fiber being to the home. So I don't know that we would do that. But your point is the same, that it's
Right.
limiting.
Right, and I'm actually setting it up for further discussion when you're done.
Yeah.
So what has been the disclosure to your membership on that? I mean, how are you legally covered with the right-of-way having property rights for electricity?
Right.
But yet you already have installed the fiber. So how are you legally covered with disclosure to your members to be, it could go either way.
Yes.
And so how do you cover yourselves for that? The liability to the organization, to the co-op, and to the individual?
Yeah, that's a good question. And with what Choptank has done so far, we have only installed the fiber for purposes related to electric service. And our easements are broad enough that they allow us to install poles, wires, and anything else that we need for electric service purposes. And the communications aspect of that fiber is essential to modern day electric supply. So we feel like we are very comfortable with what we have right now, that the fiber that we've installed is for the purpose of electric service, because it is. We're not providing broadband, high-speed internet. We're not doing that. So I think we're in the majority as far as co-ops across the country who, just like when we first installed, back in 1940, when we first installed the equipment that we needed for electric service, that equipment has changed over time, and the broadband fiber is part of that change, that the modern equipment needed to provide electricity includes the communications aspect over the fiber.
What if I want to look my bill up online, I don't have internet access? Could you use that and say, we're providing this as a way for you to look up your electric account from your computer?
I think that
for other things like
I think
them.
it would probably be a stretch to say that. And actually, the reason that I wanted to do this presentation, all of this is a good discussion, and I'm glad that this isn't boring you with things that maybe you already have talked about in depth. But what I want to do, everything I've talked about up till now has kind of been the problem, that we've got this excess fiber, we'd like to use it, but we're scared because of this lawsuit. But on the next couple slides, and they're not showing right this second, but on the next couple slides, I have possible solutions that other states have used and that we could potentially use that I think, and again, I'm very much new to this process, so if there's things that are a total no-go and you guys say this is not an angle that works, I feel like there's enough different options here with legislative solutions that there has to be something that would probably be acceptable to everybody. So until she gets that back up and running, I'll just... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
In the public right of way, you're covered.
We have some county easements, we have very few municipal easements, and the vast majority are private property owners.
I just want to think of where the Choptank runs usually along public roadways. I mean, a lot of the middle.
But sometimes it's on...
And it does cross over private and stuff.
Right.
I guess, just asking, I mean, if it's along a roadway, in what is really where we build as a provider in the public utility easement, that section presumably is not subject. It would only be the sections that
even for county-owned right-of-ways, we would have to go to those individual counties and perfect those individual easements by making the language more broad than it is now.
So in those class action lawsuits, the counties even would have.
I don't know the answer to that, but I think that our system becomes such a patchwork of counties and private property owners that it still would be pretty burdensome for us to try to figure that out, you know, to perfect those individual easements and work with each of those individual counties and re-record easements and things like that. So that may be the direction that we have to go if we're not able to go down this path, but we're trying to find something that is easier. Yeah.
Legislation, could your cooperative members vote to change the easements and permit?
That's a good question. That's a very good question, but I think some co-ops who have actually become ISPs have done something along those lines where they basically say at the point that you become a broadband customer, you sign a membership agreement that allows our easement. But what you said is something a little bit different.
Because you want the transport across the properties even if the property owner didn't.
Right, and the problem is that I think the problem would be there, and all of this is just levels of legal risk. So it's not necessarily that wouldn't be a possible solution to de-risk it. But the problem with that potentially is if an individual member does not vote, then the cooperative votes to expand the easement, that individual member would say, we still have a contract between Chaptank and that member, and you can't change it as a co-op when I have it as an individual. That would be the argument, I think.
So how many easement agreements do you have?
Somewhere between 40 and 100,000.
So otherwise, to get them to amend it.
Right, and that is another possible solution, that we would hire a contractor to contact all these property owners, and we would get, I think the vast majority of them, when you explain the fact that it's already out there, the vast majority of them would sign. But then you have these individual people who would want to profit, and then you can't really afford to pay everybody $1,000 or everybody however much money. Yeah.
Wouldn't a potential solution for this just be that when each individual homeowner, co-op member, decides to acquire a retail broadband service, right, either from the co-op or from the co-op's partner, then that as part of that process, when they sign up for retail service, they grant the easement that is in the way now?
That is definitely an option, but some of them are not going to have any interest in becoming a broadband internet customer. They, you know, the theory would be that, well, if you have an individual person who has an easement with Chaptank, does not have any interest in becoming a broadband customer, so they never sign that document, then those are the people who, it shrinks your pool, but it still would be the same problem if that member chose not to take the internet service.
Right, but it only affects the drop lines into the resident's home.
No.
It doesn't affect, it affects your long-haul transmission.
The middle mile, everything, yes. It's the whole, in fact, Chaptank only has the fiber on the middle mile. We don't have the fiber to the individual homes
No,
right
I know,
now.
we have a large RSA together, the
Yeah.
Maryland Broadband Cooperative and
Right.
Chaptank Electric, and we solve problems and do good deeds with it all over the
That's
place.
right. And when I came into the role and we started having these discussions about what we can do with that fiber and how we can expand that, actually that was one of the big questions that I had, was how are we doing it already with Maryland Broadband? And I think because it's an exchange where we use some of your fiber and you use some of our fiber, we've always thought that that still falls under that. We're using it for the purpose of electric service, and we're giving it to you in exchange for the fiber that you're giving back to us. And so because there's no money changing hands, and because we're only using the fiber for electric service, it still feels less risky than what would eventually be a much more helpful solution to the individual members, or not just members. That's the other thing to keep in mind, that if you happen to be a Delmarva Power customer, for instance, that is located where you live near a Choptank middle mile fiber, it could actually provide more connectivity for you as well, and Choptank would be fine with that. So it's not just helping Choptank members, it would also be helping anybody on the Eastern Shore that's near our fiber. So I don't want to cut off questions, but I have been excited to get to the solutions because I don't want you guys to think that this is, impossible. So this is what, and I took a little poll at the last National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, NRECA, conference for legal, I guess is the legal seminar. I took a poll of which states have attempted to solve this problem legislatively, and the answer I got back was 4. And so each of them have gone a different direction. Missouri is the state that had that massive lawsuit. So they have attempted to fix the problem. And this is just a high-level summary of the different angles that you can go. And I've got a couple of other slides that show example language that we could use. But Tennessee did something that was the most broad, and each of the others have kind of done a much smaller version of that. So I'll just walk through really quickly on the next couple slides. But the first option, go ahead to the next one. One of the things that several of them did is a declaration of legislative intent that existing broadband resources be used, existing utility resources be used to the extent possible. That's not that helpful. Maybe we would include that and maybe we wouldn't, but it really doesn't help the risk problem for Choptank. The next slide is giving electric utilities the power to condemn right-of-ways, condemn private property. Right now, Choptank and other utilities have the right to do that for electric purposes. This would expand that to allow Choptank to, and any other utility, obviously, to allow them to use the condemnation process to get a broadband right-of-way, just like they can for a utility electric right-of-way. This is also not really that helpful. It seems like it would be, but Choptank doesn't really use this process very much because it's time-consuming and it's just not something that we really do. The next slide is easement expansion, where basically the broadest version of this is what Tennessee did, where they said any easement that the co-op owns for utility purpose, they can now use for broadband service. And it's just kind of like with a stroke of a pen, they change that contractual relationship between the landowner and Choptank, and it's the Tennessee statute, and I provided a link to all the statutes in here. The Tennessee statute is very short. It's like anything that you have the right to use the property for utility service, now you can use it for broadband. A more limited version of that basically says the utility is not required to get an easement or use the condemnation process for broadband services if you're already using the equipment for electric service. So this would be very helpful for Choptank. I don't know how helpful it would be for all the stakeholders, but for Choptank, because the fiber is already there, this would be a possible solution.
If anybody was building something new, they would first have to make sure it was used for something they were doing for electric.
Yeah, I think that's a good point,
It
yes.
seems like legislatively it'd be easier to get through without other incumbents and stuff thinking you were like a Comcast or Sean Bellini's not here, but I can imagine the big ISPs would be like, oh no, we don't want another. Like Tennessee is one of the states that has struggled with the attachment laws.
And Tennessee did the most broad, they did the top one. Tennessee said, and I think they only applied it to cooperatives in Tennessee. They did. In Tennessee, if a co-op has an easement for utilities, you can use it for broadband. For this other one, I agree, it's probably less controversial for all the stakeholders. Next slide is something that is, I think, even less controversial. I think big ISPs and others would probably have less heartburn. this is a lawsuit damages limitation. So when we talked before about the fact that this equipment is on your property is kind of a theoretical damage, it's not a real damage. It's not actually more offensive to you to have that fiber now being lit up, so to speak. It's already there. And so what these damage limitations do is say the damages, if a property owner sues on a theory of easement expansion, the damages are limited to the actual interference with that property owner's use and enjoyment as of the day you start using it. So there's no accumulation of damages by saying, well, you've been doing this for 10 years, so I should get more money. And any profits or revenues derived from, let's say, Choptank leasing the fiber to an ISP are not relevant in the damage calculation. So this would also be very, very helpful in deterring a group, like a plaintiff's attorney, from drumming up a class action lawsuit. You know, the thing that I picture when I think about these class action lawsuits, and again, I'm not running down plaintiff's attorneys or any other attorneys since I am one, but the thing that I picture is people, co-op members who are perfectly happy, and maybe they're even extra happy because they now have broadband access, getting a letter in the mail that says you could probably get anywhere between $2,000 and $10,000 if we're able to be successful on this lawsuit. And this damage limitation makes it more likely that that plaintiff's attorney would try it in another state. That's kind of the way that I look at it. So this would be something that I think, as another angle, I think would be fairly inoffensive and would help dramatically. So next slide just shows that we have the option to make it applicable to co-ops or utilities, or, you know, both. Next slide, and it's the last one. I'm sorry this took more time than I thought it was going to, but the big picture is if we can't fix the easement problem, Choptank probably can't be that helpful in using the existing fiber that we have. It's going to take a lot longer for us to perfect the easements or, you know, go through whatever other process we need to go through because of this problem. It's something that the board is worried about. It's something that our members, you know, they don't deserve for us to take that risk. So it's cost prohibitive for the ISPs to run fiber to a huge part of the Eastern Shore. And the best part is that this wouldn't cost taxpayers anything. It would just be a legislative fix to a problem. So that is my presentation. Thanks for the questions. If we have more discussion, that's great. Yeah.
There actually is, I have a mic.
Oh, good, okay.
There actually is another issue that's very similar to this. In Montgomery and Howard, and I know it happens in other counties, people like Comcast can't get to areas that do have the proper density because the easements are for those poles. So anywhere there's a pole line, there's an easement. And they would like to go around and use the ground adjacent to the poles. But they've been stopped by property owners who want money to allow them to go past. So the broader bill that you're talking about would also help this situation, would actually get people hooked up right away because the density is already there, the franchise agreements already require it, but the companies and Comcast can't get to the customers because property owners are blocking it.
Right, and that kind of ties in with the pole attachment as well, that all the poles on the Eastern Shore that are owned by Choptank, this issue about us leasing the fiber, we have the exact same issue when it comes to allowing a Comcast or whoever to attach to our poles. Because we don't feel like we can give them the right to attach to the poles, even if it was for free, even if we didn't charge them a rental value to attach to the poles, we feel like we don't have the right to allow them to attach because the easement doesn't allow for it. So even if Comcast or whoever wanted to run their own fiber, but just attach to our poles for the sake of efficiency and all that, we feel like we wouldn't be able to do it unless we fix the problem.
So there's actually, I think, another problem.
Don't tell me that, I just figured out this one.
So, and you can tell me how you're getting around it. The Electric Co-op Act says you're only allowed to sell electric service. If you're leasing dark fiber, you're selling more than electric service. How are you getting around that?
I think there's some ability for us to operate a subsidiary. And I don't know the details on that because I haven't really dug into it, but co-ops in Maryland have done a few other enterprises over the years through a for-profit subsidiary, and the profits ultimately roll back, they roll up and are distributed to the members, but I believe that that's the case. And I'm fairly confident on that because it's been done for a long time in Maryland. I just don't have very much detail on it.
The other electric co-op is looking for a solution to the only provide electric service. So this is a multi-stage problem.
Yeah. Well, I don't really think of that as being as big a problem, but I guess it probably is another layer to it. And well, they can work on that one, and we'll work on this one, and then we'll just do both.
Do a big bill that says everybody can do everything.
Yeah, right.
I have a broader question. If you at Chop Tank already have wire in the ground, so potentially there is the potential for people who are being underserved right now to get connected with some word changes, correct?
Yes. I mean, now we actually have interest from Bay Country, from Eastern Utilities, from other ISPs that have already contacted us about doing this. They know that we have the fiber, they want to lease it, and we're moving really slowly because we're trying to figure out this legal issue. And I think that doing something like this would give us that comfort.
So if you all have that kind of access, does everybody have that kind of access? If everybody who gets electricity, I mean, and what percentage of the population who, see where I'm going? What percentage of the people who can't get connected right now already have the potential to be connected, which would decrease all of those millions of dollars? Then why aren't we mapping that out and figuring out a way to safeguard everybody's proprietary rights, but at the same time carve out ways that there would be cooperative arrangements to be able to share that for shared resource sharing for a common good? And how do we do that?
Well, I can speak better to Chop Tank than I can to the other utilities, but the fiber that Chop Tank has installed and that other utilities tend to install, like we talked about before, it's the middle mile stretches, not going to the individual homes. So Chop Tank does not run fiber to individual homes as part of providing electric service, and I don't think the other utilities do either. Whether the other utilities like Delmarva and Smecco and others have a lot of fiber out there the way that Chop Tank does would basically depend on how modern their system is. Because I know that when you talk to other co-ops, for instance, across the country, they'll say, well, we're going to become an ISP, because a lot of co-ops are interested in becoming ISPs. And then you find out, well, they're actually really at the very early stages of that process because they haven't installed any fiber on their system yet, even for electrical purposes. So how much fiber other utilities have, I don't know. But because Chop Tank invested in that for the last 10 years for electric purposes to provide more reliability, and I'm not an engineer in the least, but like for the devices to be able to communicate to one another and relay data back and forth about outages and things like that, that's why we've installed the fiber. But I don't know how much other utilities have out there.
It's important to note, too, that not every county even has an electric co-op in it. Right. Most of them are covered by the big utilities, and if it's a rural area, I can tell you those areas are not on those more modern systems.
And the other part of your question about the percentage, Chop Tank serves the rural parts of all 9 counties on the Eastern Shore, so the fiber touches all 9 counties, but it doesn't necessarily go. For instance, perfect example is like Hooper's Island. Of course, that's really remote, whereas, like I said before, you don't have to be very remote to have this problem. But we get close enough with our fiber to Hooper's Island that there are actually some communities there where the population, once you get all the way out there, the population is dense enough to make it worth an ISP's while all the ISP has to do is connect their own fiber from our fiber to the home.
But what that does, if we're able to share use in the middle mile, then it frees up additional resources to do the absolute last mile, which brings down the cost for everybody, is what I was looking at.
At that point, it's a privately funded activity, yes. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's what I wanted to ask you guys. I don't know.
So this is for co-ops. How about the private energy companies like the BGEs and the Exelon umbrella of those companies? They've got smart meters, so they've got fiber out everywhere. This would inevitably be an incentive for them to want to try to do some business to help people get the fiber access.
Yeah, I think that's right. One thing that's different between a big investor-owned utility and a co-op is the FCC regulations regarding pole attachment that we talked about before. And basically, the FCC came out with this regulation that basically said, if you're a utility, not counting co-ops, utilities can allow and must allow cable companies, phone companies, broadband telecom companies to attach to their poles, and you can charge a rental fee that's fixed by the FCC. That's basically how the FCC regulations work for pole attachments. So BG&E, for instance, may already be receiving rental income from Comcast or whoever. If Comcast is running fiber on BG&E's poles, then it would just be a rental fee for pole attachments. But what our co-op situation is that pole attachment reg doesn't apply to us, so we're left with the easement. You asked about who would oppose. One thing to be aware of when you're talking about the easement, one thing to be aware of is it is a private contract. The easement is a private contract between an individual property owner and an an individual company, essentially. So you could have opposition from property rights advocates, and of course everyone's a property rights advocate, but you could have people saying that those individual landowners have the right to get their fair market value by getting a second easement from a broadband provider. So rather than expanding the one easement that Choptank has, that member could procure for whatever, a couple $1,000s, their own agreement. I just don't think that that's a good argument. I think that when it comes down to people's really precious property rights that need to be taken seriously, I don't know that this is really the same thing as that. This is, you've already got the pole, you've already got the fiber, it's just allowing kind of a common sense use. Mm-hmm.
Safety and welfare that they approve these new rights? Looking at for emergency services, medical, education, all that, and that would be the argument.
That it makes it worth, yeah.
And then if you get a co-op, I was just thinking, if you get a co-op to share and be the leader in doing that model, then what else would other entities step up to the plate for the public good?
So some of the easement grantees, though, are not cooperative members. You just happen to have to pass through their property to get to where you want to get to. Because we have easements, too. We have, I don't know how many tens of thousands. And not everybody is a subscriber, but you have to get through them to get to your next customer. So there's a healthy percentage that they're going to want as much as they can get out of you to allow that easement.
I think the vast majority of, I guess I shouldn't say, but I think the vast majority of the easements that Choptank holds are with Choptank members, just because of the rural nature of our territory. But you're right that in theory, you would be expanding, like Choptank is going to get, when we lease this fiber, Choptank is going to get rental income. You know, we're providing the fiber that we spent money to install, and then whoever the ISP is happy to lease it from us rather than installing it themselves at an additional cost. Whatever money we make from it, assuming we can solve the problem that Rick had mentioned, but whatever money we make from that flows back to our members, which you're right, there could be some easement holders who are not members who don't sort of profit financially. But I know that when our board and Choptank leadership has been excited about this prospect of trying to help with the broadband problem, it's really not about money. I mean, I think we would want to try to get some kind of return on investment for the fiber that we spent money installing. But at the end of the day, that rental income is really not significant compared to the massive benefit to the rural residents.
Well, it can also keep your rates down and help for
Yeah,
maintenance.
it all flows to the same pot.
Improvements, yeah.
It all flows to the same pot, which is member owned, but I get your point about that.
Yeah, and of the options, the condemnation versus amending the easement, there's no comparison between the two. The condemnation one would be I think that would be very controversial.
Right. And whichever route we go, if we can tack on the damage limitation, that would be that much more clear that Maryland is not a state that's particularly friendly to this kind of lawsuit.
I know that this is Choptank. SMECO has also approached us and basically said they see the only allow electric service in the Electric Co-op Act as being a big hurdle. They don't see it the way that you're seeing it. And SMECO is contemplating providing broadband service in their unserved areas. They would like that particular language changed. If, for instance, SMECO did do that, it would save the state possibly $10 to $20 million in having to fund somebody else because they would do it themselves.
Would you guys be okay if I made a motion to recommend that we include the easement amendment and the damage limitation portion to the report that we're preparing for November? Would everybody be okay with that? Absolutely. I'll make that motion right now.
Can I modify that motion to also amend the Electric Co-op Act to allow broadband service by electric co-ops?
Did you say that in the microphone so they've got a copy?
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can you put the intent?
And I'm guessing that the report could include different legislative options for solving the easement problem, and then also the legislative options for solving that. And
So I have a question about legislative intent. I'd like to get the opinion from the senators. I'm not a big fan of extra verbiage in legislative proposals because they tend not to offer a whole lot other than create an opportunity for criticism. I don't know what Senator Eckert and
Short and sweet.
Short, yeah.
short and sweet. That will be in our report. We'll say short and sweet plus the.
That they're two, real quick, sorry, you're probably going to say this, maybe make them separate because, again, as a service provider, I just worry about the big providers railroading the second piece that Rick recommended. The first piece, again, I don't think anybody sees any real controversy with because it's middle mile, it's where you already have service, all that, but electric co-ops getting into the service provider business may meet some resistance. We're small enough it wouldn't hit our radar, but so somehow keep it so one can't defeat the other. Doesn't that happen in legislative proposals too? Or
Well, that's why you would do them separate.
Okay, okay.
I would make the suggestion that the easement is one, that second language, and then the damage one is another, and then
This is
that
third?
one would be the third. Because I
think so. I think so too.
Gonna be an issue.
or just so that it wasn't they weren't over building or whatever, because the other states, ran into that, like in Tennessee, I think even where it got fought pretty heavily because it was seen as subsidizing just being overbuilt.
Well, and all of those, all of this discussion is useful to be able to know how to present it and to be able to anticipate where the issues are going to be able to handle those as well. And then my experience with the task force I sat on with regard to foreclosures and mortgage issues, we made sure that everybody was in agreement of it. So when we went to committee, all the members were there supporting it. So, and I know not all of our members are here today, but hopefully they're tuning in and can weigh into the discussion before we finalize the report. Because we need to make sure we include those who aren't here physically today.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this has been a great discussion, but I think before the task force as a group recommends any legislative solutions that we have a little time to deliberate about that. And then the other thing is, and Maryland Broadband is fortunate in that we have long-standing and excellent resource share partnerships and agreements with both Chop Tank Electric and with Southern Maryland Electric Co-op. I also want to just throw out there for consideration, I don't want to put undue pressure on those organizations to solve the rural broadband problem. One of the things that happens is that we find that when an electric utility builds fiber to support their SCADA systems, they built it to support the needs of an electric cooperative, which are very different from the distribution needs of a telecommunications company. And and I've looked at, because I have over 70 ISP members that have looked at, can you get down this road and there's 14 houses in a mile and a half, and I know I can see on your website that Chop Tank runs along it. And it's all terrific, but then when we get into and Brian can tell you about this because we partner on stuff all over the place, then you get into the nuts and bolts of what it takes to actually distribute a house-by-house service. All of a sudden, the infrastructure costs are material. And so that's what this task force is for. Maybe that's what some of the offices, Rick's legislative money is for, to help solve that. But I would just feel uncomfortable if we left this meeting thinking that that we identified a silver bullet and our work was done. So. Okay.
Yeah, I would add that we don't have a cooperative out in Western Maryland, so we don't have a solution for this area using electric utilities. Okay. Well, but
Yeah, I think that just some of these solutions are just part of the arsenal to try and fix the problem. It may not work everywhere, but if it reduces the overall burden to the state to solve it, then it's something to go after.
well, we had a motion. I am concerned we don't have a quorum. So could we maybe amend that motion that we recommend we put it in the report, and then when we get to the report, we can adopt it there.
Would you consider tabling this for 30 days and bring it up at our next meeting? I'm concerned that I haven't had enough time to consider whether this would have a positive impact on my employer or not. But in 30 days, I'll have a better feel for that.
October 25th is our next meeting in Annapolis at MDA, Department of Agriculture.
And not right before the election, too. We have to do anything we can do if we can't make the meeting, if we'd be able to communicate via email about it. Crazy things happen right before elections. I don't know why, but I was just forward thinking. But yeah, you could definitely hold off until everybody has a chance to evaluate things.
Or you could just make the recommendation with the caveat that we would finalize it or have more discussion on it at the next meeting when everybody would have an opportunity to get more information. That works. Does that work?
Probably better.
I think once you put it down on paper, it's kind of like we have a consensus on it. I recognize that we do have the election coming up and the timing is not the best for it, but I would really like the opportunity to review. And if Sean was here, he'd say the same thing. For God's sakes, let us think about it because it could be a very, very big issue for us. Maybe it's not, but it could be. Atlantic Broadband.
And I know we're late, I know that I'm late to the party with this whole topic and presentation and everything, but it's just the way it worked with me getting involved in the, Bob Belkey getting ready to retire and stuff like that.
Sure would be easier if I withdrew the motion, and I'll withdraw the motion, and we can bring it back. We can bring it back next meeting.
Okay. Is that me making that noise?
Charlotte, could you distribute some of the language out, just make sure everybody has it, and that way, the next, 30 days, everybody can take it back and look at it.
Okay. Yep, you can do that. Distribute it out.
You want me to send it to you?
Yeah.
Or you've already got it?
And then, or if you could put it in a paragraph, and then I can send it out to the full task force, so they have it.
We're ready to go next meeting.
Yeah.
Fire it up.
Well, yep.
Sure. That map shows how rural our counties are, that we've been trying to make a case for George.
Okay. Okay. I think we have 14.
Yeah, you saw it green in the counties out here.
Some of these are.
Population wise, Garrett has
You.
the least amount of.
I think it's you.
Yeah, you got. We're all counting.
Yeah, start
1 to 10 people per mile.
1 to 10 people.
But there's a lot of green out there. Some of that.
The whole county.
A lot of green.
This is light green, this is dark green.
We got to keep it on.
Dark. That's the record.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, Sarah. We'll get that, send that language out, we'll send it out to the membership, and then table the discussion for the next meeting. But I think it was an excellent discussion. So I don't, lunch isn't here yet, but it should be coming here shortly, so did anybody want to take a break and come back after lunch, or you want to keep working? This next issue is we gotta get to recommendations, and I have started a draft report that, thank you, Senator Edwards, draft is due, the report is due November 30th. Concurrent, but not necessarily pertaining to us, the small cell legislation that was out there last year. There's still lots of conversation with MML and NATO on the small cell. It's addressed, and the reason why I included it is because that does include permitting and rights-of-way access that we've been concerned about. Where are you? I'm on page 6, thank you, at the very bottom, yeah. I also included FirstNet. We had presentations from them last month, talking about some of their efforts. And then I have a space, I've made an invitation to the chair of the Next Generation 911, because they talk a lot about some funding mechanisms as well as public safety, which is also a concern for rural broadband. So hopefully we can have somebody from that commission. They just started, so I don't know how much they'll be able to contribute, but I figured we should make the invitation. It's up to them if they want to come on. So then I get into potential options, and I do talk about the governor's executive order that does say we want to have universal service by the year 2022. Yeah. So how are we going to get there? Attempted to get to that with, I just talked to Rick Gordon about the Office of Rural Broadband, because I didn't feel comfortable enough to include some of the information you shared with us this morning, but I will, particularly with the efforts with the request for interest in partnerships on accessing federal dollars. And then also probably putting in more information about the model he proposes, which is supporting local governments, priority first, and then getting to providers. But I don't know that there's a timeline worked out for that yet. But I'll add that information in here as well. That was on here. I talked a little bit about the Rural Maryland Rural Broadband Assistance Fund, which is was just reauthorized. This legislative session is through the Department of Commerce, and we do believe that one of the limitations of the Rural Maryland Council, and I think the Office of Rural Broadband, is who's going to be eligible to apply for these funds. Typically, we're constrained to only local units of government, institutions of higher education, and nonprofits. Individuals and private corporations are not qualified entities for our program. And I believe the same limitations are going to be on the Office of Rural Broadband. However, there is the Rural Broadband Assistance Fund, which I don't believe has that limitation, particularly for private industry, for the private companies. So I included that. Rural Broadband Assistance Fund hasn't had funding since, I think, last was fiscal year 2010. And then I did include the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund. We received about $1 million, thank you to the legislators, for infrastructure. And we didn't have any applications for broadband this year. However, we have had applications for broadband. I included some information on those. We did improvements for the town of Dayton in our private network for the town agencies. We funded the Garrett County Community Action to pick up those low-income homes. We also funded in Frederick County a small extension for Myersville new library so they could get internet. So we've had, and we have the same restraints. We require a match, and generally it needs to be intergovernmental or regional in some way. So to drill down into a census block is going to be difficult for the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund, and I probably think the Office of Rural Broadband is going to have that problem too. They're going to want large contiguous areas to service. So those are challenges we're going to have. And then to get to the $100 million question, how much is all this going to cost? We're working towards that. Rick has made some assumptions, but that's why I've been 64% is what we think. We think it's 15% to 20%, no service at all. And then how many of those really want it or are going to sign up for service? And, so that's kind of where we are. I would say, that's where I'm thinking 10% is really the unserved piece. So how we get to those resources that we request from the governor's office would be to go to the unserved areas. And then we've been talking a lot about tax credits, sales tax exemptions, depreciation on equipment. So I included those options in here because for us, I think that's, if we can lower the costs for broadband installation, we'll get the private ISPs to extend out more rural to less dense areas, kind of the thought we had there. But so this is open discussion for any folks. And then finally, what I included was the electric co-op provision, just the easement provision. Because like I said, we had heard from SMECO. They're on the same page. The problem would have been if SMECO wanted to do one thing and Shoptake wanted to do another, but both of the large electric cooperatives are on the same page. They don't want to do retail last mile service. They want to do that middle mile service, of which they're already doing. So I did include that piece at the very end in this report.
And we can think about whether we want it to be applicable to electric cooperatives or to utilities generally because of Western Maryland. If the Western Maryland utility has fiber, it could be useful for the same reason.
I just want to go back real quick on the commercial inventory of personal property. Yeah. You might just want to double check. I'm not sure that SSET actually does the assessments on that. I think personal property is self-reported by the entities, and SSET is So we were just dealing with this issue on another project, so.
What page is it on?
Page 8. Yeah. And for the, and most of the counties already offer exemptions from a lot of this first. There's only a handful that don't, and I don't think any of them were rural, I think they were all in suburban jurisdictions. So I could take that out, we talked about it.
So is the thought that the equipment related to broadband services exempt?
From the sales tax, well, there's property taxes. There's the depreciation fees on taxes, and then there's the sales tax on the purchase.
So, I don't know where the broadband piece falls into it, but I know, for example, in Frederick County, we do not have business personal property tax. I don't think that applies to utilities. So I don't know how.
It could be different from each county to county.
Each exemption, sometimes the exemptions include utilities, sometimes they don't. And I don't know where the ISPs and other broadband providers will fall into that. So just a thought.
I think we do for, I think Garrett only does it for what, gas, utility maybe?
This is personal property. Yeah, it was tough to find information, cohesive listing of what all the jurisdictions, they're all over the place with what they charge.
So I think it would be more difficult to just have like a flat rate or a tax or an exemption across the state because it's gonna vary from county to county. And that's gonna be a harder sell. I mean, unless you do something like Montgomery County, which they have explained in their franchise fees, they had to have a tax and that amount goes into a fund that they then use for continuing improvements and extensions. So I have anything, yeah, related to taxes may be a little bit more difficult. Bad three-letter word.
It's gonna get vetoed by the governor. I would stay away from that.
I think there's 4 categories of personal property, and utilities is one. I don't know if broadband fits in as a utility. But these left up to local government, I don't think we want to mandate local government.
Right.
What you did and what you done.
Right. Yeah, that was my question. I'm not sure where they fit into the utility category or some other.
It'd be telecommunications, and that's a telecommunications tax that's collected. Or if each county, like Montgomery County went and got permission to collect and did it through their franchise agreement, that's how they're doing the funding. And others may not have that same capabilities, capacities.
There was a bill last year that added a fee that actually passed out of the House committee for non-compliance of the franchise agreements. So if there was an incident, it was a $5,000 fine. So say there was a customer complained and it was fine, found that you were not in compliance, it's a $5,000 fine. It did pass out of the House committee and out of the House delegates and into the Senate, but it didn't go further than that. It was more, we kind of saw it more as a message to the ISP, to the large ISPs that they need to be a little more consumer friendly.
The stick method.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it'll be reintroduced this next session. I don't know if that's something we might get into.
We'll just have the small ISPs roll up and leave because the threat of that kind of penalty would just be disastrous. Particularly if the wireless one was in here that literally talks about just a lightning strike can set her back.
Yeah.
That's the big guys that passed, I can tell you.
So I didn't include that in there because I didn't think that was something we wanted, that path we wanted to go down. There was also a bill a couple years ago looking at just restructuring the telecommunications tax that actually cut the current tax but broadened the base. So it would have made satellite compliant with telecommunications, taxes, and pay-per-view, voice over internet protocol. I didn't include that in here either, because there's a question of, is that a tax? You're restructuring, you're lowering it, but some people are gonna have to pay it. I didn't previously have that, so I didn't include that either, because that was too close to, the tax. So the strategy, I was saying, ask for resources, support the funding for the Office of the Rural Broadband. Look at these there's a tax credit that we talked about for broadband services and expansion. I don't know how likely that is. It's tough with tax credits. Members of the Senate committee could probably talk more about that. And then we talked about the sales tax exemption on broadband equipment.
I thought we talked about right in the round. Remember how complicated that got?
It did.
So I included these just as options, not right. So we need to get to recommendations now. So, open the thoughts, comments. We've got 2 months. Gotta work those recommendations.
I kind of feel like we have to have the ISPs in the room in order to do that, because at the end of the day, I don't think anybody here as government wants to do this unless they have to, which means we either need to make regulations in such a way that they encourage ISPs to expand their footprint, or we need to subsidize certain things in a way that gets them out to the areas that we want to get back to. So, I mean, I think if regulations or anything goes in that direction, it would be great to get the feedback from ISPs to say, hey, this makes sense and this would encourage me. And right now, I think we've only got one. So it all falls on you.
What Rick seems to be right on point with it, and I mean, I talked with Atlantic Broadband and Eastern Utilities enough. I mean, even Comcast, I mean, Sean kept repeating, he's like, look, low cost or free money to expand is pretty much the end of the game. I mean, it's like, I know anywhere from 1 to 4%, and even the option to borrow. It's a difficult environment because the business case isn't there. But if you can borrow from an entity, sort of like what the state, when they have their bonding authority for projects like this casino, for example, it would not have gone through if there wasn't the option to finance over like an extended period of time or at a lower rate to make the numbers work. It's really that simple. And so specifically what Rick is saying is, hey, if we can get money available at 4% and actually lend it in the first place, because right now if any provider were to go to the bank or even their stockholders and say, we want to spend $2 million to hook up 1,000 people or 100 people in Dorchester County, no one's going to lend money. So if the state can do that and extend the numbers or lower the finance cost so that that's either spread out, let's just say you're making $10,000 a month, the cost of the loan has to be X, so that what you're making is less than what it's costing, and that either means amortizing it over a longer period or lowering the interest rate. End of story. And that's how we all work. It's just a numbers game. It's quite simple.
I just don't see that at all as being a carrot for Comcast or Verizon or anything broadband. If they need $2 million, they ain't gonna have any trouble getting it to the bank.
I think it's mixed. We've seen this. We've actually offered Comcast money to expand. They said, we don't want your money, just help us get infrastructure built. But the smaller ISPs, they're like, you need free money to
The
build.
small ISPs, absolutely. You've got to make a business case and a cash flow scenario.
Yeah.
But like the big guys, which are going to eat up a lot of the footprint, I don't think it's a money issue. I don't see them coming for a single loan.
It doesn't meet their, I guess if you're saying it doesn't meet their business model. Like, why would we waste even the time and effort for that incremental?
Well, whether it did meet their business model or didn't meet their business model, every one of their stocks is going up.
So I don't think they're gonna have any trouble borrowing the money from the bank if they needed to, or have the money in reserves if they wanna do it.
We have money we offered to Comcast, so they literally said, we don't want money, we will not take your money to build it. They built it for us.
But they took our
They took,
effort.
yeah, we dug a trench for them, threw conduit in. That's more valuable to some of those guys. They don't wanna have any strings attached, they don't wanna have any government, whatever, they just wanna.
Yeah,
Yeah. But we have another ISP that's like, you give me 30 grand, I'll build this for you, and.
Yeah.
But
I
that's
think
a
we have both.
smaller.
A small
And
ISP.
see, that's what I'm saying.
Small
I don't
ISP,
know.
they're just like, give us money, we'll get stuff done.
But a loan for you, I mean, it may change things if you can't get money from the bank, but in a lot of cases, like you said, it still isn't gonna cash flow. So to me, it almost has to be subsidized, it almost has to be either money or effort to get somebody there, I mean.
But doesn't this come down, I mean, I know by the time we have our next meeting, you're gonna need recommendations. It's
Right.
the end of October. And we've been sitting here talking about this for umpteen times.
And nothing's changed.
And what we heard in Annapolis, where you were talking 2 meetings ago, finally what ultimately happened was the small ISPs at the table all joined together and said, we're the ones that are gonna solve it if we solve it, the small guys. At the same meeting, you had the big guys sitting there telling us what works in every other daggone state, but doesn't work here. So when we get down to the recommendations, I think we're gonna need at the next meeting, we're gonna need all the ISPs, and I don't know if Charlotte has to send it out and say, we're gonna come up with some recommendations, and all the small ISPs better be there. You know the big guys are gonna get there too. But we're gonna have to drive that conversation with Brian, with you guys, and the rest of the small ISPs, and go, what recommendations are we gonna see? Because you're absolutely correct. But as far as the big guys, we know where they've gone into, in our region, in the Midshore. When the little guys have come and worked with the state, and the state's put up money with the towns and the small guys, and then 2-3 years later, the big guys come in and build right next to them, because then they figured out, oh, there's enough revenue. It's all revenue driven, it's exactly what Guy is saying. But to initially do it, it is the small, it's what you guys have said several meetings. You know, it's the lady with the satellites. We're gonna solve it. It's what's gonna incentivize you guys or help you, but that's gonna be the recommendations I see that we're gonna have to come up with. I mean, in a month.
To me, it reminds me a lot of the cable industry. So you had a lot of mom and pop cable shops. You know, they had a satellite dish at their house, they started their own cable company, and to me, that's the small ISPs. They go out and they bust their hump, and they start providing cable to these places that never had that as an option, anything else. And at the end of the day, the small guy wins because he provided the service to these and he got bought out by the big guy. The people win because they ended up having their cable. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody's happy. But that's the way the cable industry works. And I don't see where this industry is a whole lot different than that, because you're trying to provide a service out where there isn't any. And you're willing to do it on less of a profit margin than the big guys are. At the end of the day, everybody wins. And that's kind of the way it worked. Yeah, there's still people that have direct TV on their roof, and they're always going to have that. You're not going to get it out to everybody, but you know, to me, you guys are the ones that are going to kind of show us what works and what doesn't work for you to expand your networks.
Absolutely.
So Charlotte, is it possible to go to the ISPs and ask them what their recommendations would be that they were going to discuss at the next meeting? Like have them prepare what they'd like to see happen?
Just to say, if you want to drive this in a 4-hour meeting, I almost think you got to push it out ahead of time.
Absolutely. 2 weeks at a time, say, this is recommendation 1 through 11, and we're going to talk about these and vote on them. If you got any more, I need them now. Tweak them, be ready to come,
Right,
draft them up.
and if you're putting 1 through 11, you put the least controversial ones first. Maybe you put the legislative ones, 1, 2, and 3. You know, you go with.
In all fairness,
if they're not listed there, 1 through 3, you're going to have a hard time. We're going to have a hard time getting.
And I would block the 10 to 2 and say, we're not having any presentations. This is recommendation time. I mean, this is, and let them know, and that way everybody will get there. All the small ISPs, they'll all be there because they know it's.
And you know, quite frankly, I mean, you know, I love sitting in meetings all day long. But I mean, maybe it's 9 to 3, or maybe, you know, maybe it's because this is the last one. I mean, if you have 12 of them, give each one 15 minutes right there.
Are you talking about the next meeting?
This October.
We would come back in November and
Well, that's the SCPE, which all the cable companies in the country go to in Atlanta.
Okay.
We can change the date.
Sean, he's more of he's not an engineer, so he might.
Can you just shoot us those dates so we can?
22nd through 25th.
Okay. Because we're continuing to do.
If we were in Atlanta, we could.
I was gonna say, we could go to Atlanta. We can figure this out.
But yeah, you know, what Rick asked for really, counties, was what each county thought it would take. And his assumption was that they would partner with whoever that provider was that was their friendly. He said, his funniest comment was Somerset said, "We're not really sure." He said, but that was an okay response because that just means
Oh, thank God.
Step
Because I
one.
kept thinking on every question, I'm like, well, we don't know until we
Right.
hire somebody to tell us
yeah,
what we
no,
want to do.
yep, exactly. He said, so
Wherever-
step one for them would be
Every question was the same answer.
hire someone
We
who
don't
can
know
tell
until
us.
we figure this out.
But for Dorchester, I submitted to our county for that. I know Talbot, I mean, I don't know if the other rural western, how many of those 9, he didn't divulge details, I don't know if it's proprietary, but hopefully even out of that. But, so it should have been articulated to people that are willing to do it, so it would just be like a, sort of what he got, but maybe a little more concrete, like into what you said, what can we do to facilitate what they've said it requires, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, it's gonna be very dynamic too, because depending on what passes, if legislation passes, it could be a whole different solution, less expensive.
Well, yeah, and it's the ask from the officer Broadband was very, it's technology neutral. It did not dictate any technology. Just knowing the solution is gonna be hybrid fiber wireless. Don't overbuild areas that already have it. That's a waste of money. And then from our standpoint, again, it might be different from Atlantic Broadband and Comcast, was project how many you're gonna hook up, at what rate per month, calculate what that is per month, and the amount that you're asking to do it over X amount of years needs to be less per month than what your potential revenue is. End of story.
I'm hoping that really the involvement of the government, that is the county, is really, for the most part, limited to identifying the priority areas that are lacking infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now, whether they want to play a role in building that out monetarily, that comes down to Rick's program and who's borrowing money and, you know, how critical it is. But, I mean, the biggest role I think they can play is by the voices of the people, because we all know who yells the loudest about not having this stuff and needing infrastructure, is to identify those areas and then prioritize them. And I know nobody wants to get into prioritizing things because it gets political, but at the end of the day, if you want to get something done, you gotta pick your priorities. You're not gonna get it all done at once. So, you know, they gotta make those decisions and then work with ISPs to try and get something built out.
It'd probably be real helpful when you get ready to do the recommendations to it. Sit down with Rick. Because Rick's seen it, like you say, he just got 9. I mean, you guys might be able to at least take what you've already written, at least to throw a straw man out there for everybody, because you've been collecting it for a year and a half from all our meetings.
Curious to see which 9 it is. Probably the whole shore.
You don't see Mary's. I think Frederick. I thought Frederick was one of those.
Did we? I just
Did you
emailed
guys
something,
send
so
That would be for 19.
You sent it in?
Well, in the one
Free
area
money.
we haven't talked about is homeowners, because that's the biggest complaint we get, is the homeowner usually contacts us to say, I called Comcast, they told me it's $20,000 to be hooked up. You know, so are there some strategies we can consider that helps the homeowner hook up to existing systems?
Charlotte and I've had a few conversations with us, and Steve and I have too, and with the restriction on state funds having to go, we can't go directly to a homeowner, but to a county, and then the county perhaps can just establish a program, and that would be through Department of Housing, Community Development, low income, meet those thresholds, help them with whatever, you know, the funding method, they would have to come up with their own program. But the issue with that, with some of the rural areas, they may not have the capability within the county government to do that. And so that makes it kind of difficult. But I still think that that's the missing link, and I think Virginia worked on that, and they're able to do these grants individually to homeowners, that somehow they were able to work that out.
They got the money through the tobacco transition, or the tobacco settlement. They used their money for broadband deployment. We used ours for land preservation. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm looking for a big pot of money. If somebody has any ideas.
This was a question I had, and I'm worried other places that just handed money out, sort of what you run into is if you have a monopolistic provider that's profit incentivized, they're going to get as much as they possibly can out of that bill. So that $20,000, sadly, you know, would come down significantly if it was a desirable customer and there was a little competition in. All that said, we just can't create competition out of thin air. If there's only one provider, there's only one provider. So my question is, when I hear Chop Tank Electric Cooperative looking for a solution, I love that business model because they really exist. Their customers love them. Everybody's a member. They're technically a nonprofit. Same thing in theory with the Maryland Broadband Cooperative. Can the state form a mechanism to actually allow these entities to go where there isn't competition and knowing that they're not for profit, they're really just looking to cover the cost? Again, that's part of our problem too. There's been millions of dollars spent in a lot of these counties, Kent being one of them, and they're not sure that they got a good deal for their money, okay? They're not going to get a good deal if it's a private provider, and this is me being a private provider, but a citizen of the Eastern Shore that wants to solve the problem. How do you form a mechanism? And again, this is pertinent because I want it to be a recommendation of the task force so that the outcome is efficient from a price standpoint. And the only way I know, and I had banged my head against the wall, and I talked to Scott about it 5 years ago, is the cooperative model. Can we make that a recommendation that a last mile cooperative can be a vehicle for this money so that it is spent in a nonprofit way? Again, profit-minded providers can be a part of this entity, as can customers or whatever. You know, Chop Tank Electric uses subcontractors that are in the business to make money. That's okay. You know, is that something that would work? And I don't know why it wouldn't. It hasn't happened. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not all-knowing, but to me, I just can't help but think that the answer, Chop Tank knows that they're part of the answer, Maryland Broadband knows they're part of the answer, private providers know they're part of the answer, governments know that they're part of the answer. What is an entity that can exist to receive money and solve this problem in a nonprofit umbrella that the public trusts, that the government trusts, and they know also that they're getting the expertise of private providers and the willing consumers? It's cooperative.
And is it a cooperative of
It would be.
homeowners?
It could be.
Want service.
It would be a last mile cooperative. Right now, the Maryland Broadband Cooperative is a middle mile provider, as is the relationship with, you know, if the electric cooperatives get involved. But because it's sort of a separate function and it's a lot more difficult and its expertise is different, it would make sense to have probably a separate entity, be it a sub-entity of Chop Tank or a sub-entity of Maryland Broadband, or an entirely separate entity of providers and consumers and whatever that's specialized in the last mile.
I'm told, so I
Yeah,
serve
sorry,
on a board.
I shouldn't say that with the presentation we just
I
had.
serve on our rural cooperative development entity. It's called Keystone Development Center. They're actually based over in Pennsylvania, but they cover Maryland, and they helped create the Broadband Cooperative.
Okay.
They tell me that it's possible to do a multi-jurisdiction. Problem is because the state's so diverse in its geography that you're gonna have different solutions in each jurisdiction.
You would, and it wouldn't, yeah.
And so how do you make, but I'm told it's possible, and there are examples of multi-jurisdictional cooperative that covers these different areas.
Yeah, because it's like any other corporation, it's formed at the state level. It's a legal entity within the state of Maryland under the rules and laws of the.
Pays corporate tax.
I guess so.
They do.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a consumer cooperative, and you, in your bylaws and your articles of incorporation set the rules around what this cooperative is formed to do. And in our case, it would be to accept money from a diverse set of sources to solve the last mile problem, and it would be limited to under and unserved areas, whatever we define that to be.
So you envision, So the co-op would be an ISP then,
That's
or
what I'm
they
trying
would?
to figure
It would be the organization that managed the membership, which would be ISPs and consumers. So it would need an organizational structure to sort of allocate money, receive money, and maybe even have competitive bids for the projects. So like, let's just say the co-op received $2 million for Dorchester County. They would say, okay, the Last Mile Cooperative, which is a nonprofit, so they have no incentive to want to make a profit, they would actually bring together whoever wanted to solve the problem, be it Atlantic Broadband, be it Bay Country, be it one of the wireless providers or whatever, and then it would also receive the money from the builds and then pay the providers, maybe put money into the net savings or whatever they call that within a cooperative, and then also maybe have money to pay back any debt service if they were borrowing money.
Where do they get the money from? As a transporter or?
It would is
Once
compensated.
access the federal and the state money.
Yeah, like let's just for example, yeah, there's got to be money coming from somewhere, but they could also, because they're a entity, they could conceivably borrow money. They could receive grant money, they could borrow money, but then they would be that vehicle where the money was, some of it would go to debt service, some of it would go to pay the providers that they were using to solve the problem. And
The problem with the model is that there's not, almost no grants out there pay for operations. So you still have to make money, even though you're a nonprofit.
Right.
Somebody's got to run this thing, somebody's got to keep the
Right.
books, somebody's got to organize it,
Yep.
talk to the ISPs.
Yep.
So I'm trying to figure out where the money's coming in on a regular cash flow basis
If
to
you're not
keep
the
this thing
ISP.
running. If you're not the ISP, the only other option is to be a transporter. And there's not a lot of transport in the last mile.
Well, let's just say that you get $100 a month revenue on average per subscriber. So,
But that's the ISP, right?
well, the cooperative could be the billing entity conceivably, and or the ISP, but the ISP as part of that would pay because the cooperative had funded that installation. 30% could go back to the cooperative to pay for the operational aspect. 30% would go to the service provider who got a low cost, build, and then 30% goes into like a net savings or a debt service or something like that. So yeah, there would be a very
I was just trying to figure
there'd
out
be an administrative aspect to it.
where
It
that
would
money
really
comes
be
from.
that umbrella that would make sure everyone was just focusing on.
Because they're still gonna have to, they're gonna have to maintain their lines, they're gonna have to hire somebody to make sure those lines, a data center, to make sure that they're all running and not cut. and
Well,
free.
it would just be the service providers doing all of that, the
But
members.
why not just create a fund that people could draw from to have somebody do that last mile?
The fine line in my mind is between just creating a fund, if you may not get the best deal. Like, so you want to make sure that the entity exists to make sure you're getting the best deal.
Because his point is that Julie said that, he can't access these funds, it has to go to a municipality of some sort to work with them.
And we're not clear if the municipality is going to own
We're
the
not
assets.
clear how that's actually,
Or are they just going to
Right.
contract that out?
So it'd be nice if there was a way for
Well, why don't we look at how we,
statement.
we'll go back and look at like the sanitary commission.
Right.
If you had a local last mile commission off of county government or.
So I talked to a gentleman 2 days ago who's from the Eastern Shore Broadband Authority. He services counties in Virginia on the shore. And the those two counties formed this regional authority, and they are a nonprofit, and that's how they are doing it in Acmac and Northampton.
That's what I was thinking, or look at
I can
some
look
like
at
our
that.
regional council, so you set up a commission like, there are several sanitary commissions around, but I know in Dorchester County, our sanitary commission is a separate authority, and it has to work out agreements with all kinds of folks to be able to provide the last mile getting people hooked up.
We actually talked to
So
a
would it
sanitary
be
district in West Virginia that
something
wanted to
like
provide a
that?
service.
Yes. It's sort of that quasi-private, public sort of entity that, like a,
And the
like a water authority.
government, the local governments appoint members to it.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that's the only other model I could think of, just piggyback on something that we already know to get last mile services.
Yeah, is that allowed in the?
Yeah. Well, we've created all kinds of authorities, right?
If not, we need to add it to the list, right?
We can create authorities. We did heritage authorities, and we've done water authorities, and we've done regional. We've got a lot of them. And the only reason you get a separate authority is so that they can be a conduit for funds other than just government money.
I think I think homeowners need to pay something. They need to have skin in the game, but if there's a mechanism we could subsidize that, because it's really the installation cost that is really the challenge, and then how much of it is. But if you had
always want to be
authority,
subsidizing the provider too. I mean, there's no incentive for them then too. Now with BG&E and Comcast, all those folks are giving if you're a low income or senior, you have certain thresholds in households, there are lower rates. I mean, how is that regulated? Is it just done individually by that company or the utilities? I mean, do they just do it on their own?
I know that we have some Maryland regulations for low-income electric customers, and there's a fund that I think Choptank pays money into it, and the state pays money into it, and it partially pays electric bills. I don't know that much about it, but I do know there is a fund, and it has to do with an income threshold for electric customers.
Yeah. Didn't Comcast or Verizon, don't they offer to customers that they are able to serve?
Right, that's what I'm saying.
It's students, so like kids who qualify for free meals, I mean, they were getting.
But it's the internet side, not, right?
It's
The
internet side, it's like nine, it's a way, it's like $9 a
federally
month or
subsidized, I
something.
think.
It's federally subsidized, so if,
no, I'm
Yeah, they really?
Once the infrastructure's in place,
if you
there's,
get the
it will
service to
pay
the
for itself.
house,
I mean,
there are
business
mechanisms for that lower cost of service to the household, it's just the expensive part is providing that.
Well, Sean mentioned that in Annapolis, actually, Ocean City, the $9.95 rates for students and all.
Right.
But the bottom line was, when you point blank and asked them, I mean, we did it in the meeting, they're paying for it. The existing customers, they're not getting any other monies, it's someone else whoever's paying $89.95, part of that's going there. So it's a model that's very nice within Comcast, but it's actually self-funded through their existing customer base, is what he said.
Right, so you're basically looking at a model where you create some sort of similar fund for the smaller ISPs to be able to do that if they were the last mile?
well, yeah, and I think the low-income subsidized broadband, like ongoing, is a different discussion. But I mean, once the infrastructure's in place, there's no indication that it wouldn't be sustainable. So if it was Atlantic Broadband that had built this area, then by all indication, they could build a customer, they would, maintain the asset, they would service and do everything with the customer, but because it had been part of, through the vehicle that was the cooperative, they would actually pay part of the revenue per subscriber or something back into that entity that was really an authority or whatever they were, that had facilitated the bill.
So when you say $20,000, what it really is the initial cost to get the service, and then the monthly
Right, and then
cost
there's
is
a monthly
very
subscription.
affordable, so how do you overcome that initial infrastructure cost?
And again, I just don't like the idea, because I've seen other counties do it, of just putting a pot of money out there, have somebody bid on it, and you'll have companies coming out of the woodwork, and a lot of money has been gone out to solve this problem already, and it's been worked through, and stuff's falling off of towers because of it. This, I think, would be more sustainable, because it would be a lot of entities involved. There'd be a legal framework around it. And, you know, all the providers would be in a structure where they would work together to solve the problem. I mean, it might even be that, you know, Eastern Utilities says, hey, we'll do this leg, and, you know, Bay Country, you do this leg, and some wireless provider does this leg, and they all kind of work together, and they all have, there's a board that oversees this competitive bid process or whatever to make sure the best deal's being had, but there's also not just one provider that's receiving $5 million and say, okay, go do it, good luck. You know, I think it works, I think it will work. I mean, it works with the Maryland Broadband Cooperative. It's sort of, there just needs to be a framework around this money when it does show up, and it will. It's going to show up.
I love that you think that will work and you're positive for it. I mean, we've thought, okay, so if Comcast ends at this house,
yeah,
and 2 miles down the road there's a house that could be seen by putting up a pole here and shooting a wireless signal. Comcast isn't in the fixed wireless business, so, you know, can we encourage them to work with a wireless provider to provide service to this person down here with the wireless infrastructure? I mean, like, that when you get into the weeds of how that actually works and the agreements that have to be in place, it gets to the point where the players don't play anymore. So do you really think that it's going to do it? I mean, in actuality.
Yeah, well, I mean, case in point there, you know, the Maryland Broadband Cooperative does have exchange of resource agreements with Comcast. I mean, that it will work. Now, they're a good example and they're a bad example because they're a good example because it's like, okay, what's the possibility where this would absolutely fall on its face? But what we're talking about is areas where they have decided there is no business case to go.
Exactly.
So one of two things would happen. They would decide that it was worthwhile to join this entity and participate in this legal structure that put some strings around how they did this, and that they also benefited that outcome, or another provider would have to come to the table. But yeah, the business case is made when the money shows up and that it's handled and spent appropriately and managed so that the organization that's looking out for these underserved areas, like a water commission or a Choptank Electric Cooperative or whatever, continues to solve the problem. It's not perfect, but I really, really think that's just, I've read all of these other things that were formed in the Southern Maryland area and all that stuff, and in every case, they got some money, they said, who wants to do it? They put it out there, somebody started to do it, and it just wasn't sustainable because it just wasn't, you know, so it has to be a mechanism where it's quasi-private public. It doesn't always, I mean, not all of them may fail, maybe some of them, but, you know, I don't know, for me, just, if I was a consumer, I would want to know that tax dollars or anything, that if it was happening, that there was an entity that was looking out to make sure this was sustainable. And I really, you know, I think that's it. You know?
Is there a scenario where the broadband co-op's mission could shift to do more last mile since they have all the members?
That is one of the, that's one of the possibilities. And right now they are a middle mile provider that just provides to service providers, unless they're like a Class A member, like a hospital or a school or something, they can do service that way.
They could do last mile if there wasn't another option.
No.
They can.
They can?
Well,
Probably could.
Maryland Broadband,
It's not their mission, right?
legally they can.
Okay.
The board of directors, which you have a few sitting in the room,
Right.
have opted not to, so we're not competing against the ISPs that are
There's no
members.
interest in going in and providing service where somebody else is there that can do it.
And the differentiator is that the co-op, to Guy's original point, isn't really built to serve end users very easily. Like that requires, and any other providers here in the room would say, they don't want to be picking up the phone when somebody's Wi-Fi doesn't work. They don't want to be picking up the phone when because you multiply the problems infinitely, so you need an entity that specializes in serving the end user.
But the co-op is made up of ISPs who do this stuff.
Yeah, but the co-op's customers are ISPs.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it's much easier to support a service provider who is just, as a service provider, my complaint might be the 1 or 2 or 3 circuits that you provide me are down. I'm very knowledgeable. They only have to have a certain level of expertise within the cooperative to handle that. If you've got 1,000 customers that are just end users that have zero expertise, that have all these different, it's just a different scenario. So anything that existed would have to really be specialized in the last mile. That's what we're talking about here. The end user is way more complicated. So for the Maryland Broadband Cooperative to extend its ability to do that, it really would be an entirely separate business model.
What happens whenever the co-op, when a project exists and the co-op sends out its all call to its members and says who can do this, and nobody replies? What's the option for the person that needs something done at that point?
Nobody replies. I mean,
but we're in most of the time.
We're in
yeah.
all the time.
Being a provider that does try to, and honestly, the cooperative, because they can serve, a lot of times if there's money available, they do reply themselves because there's the ability to extend their middle mile network or something like that. I've seen that, particularly if it's a hospital or a school or something like that. That's how they've done a lot of expansion.
The problem that
of
we
the
run
network.
into is we're trying to figure out what would it cost to provide the circuit to this, somebody coming to a business park.
Yeah.
Can't get numbers because we're not a member, they're not a member. So it's all like this compounded problem where no ISPs step up.
Yeah.
So we can't say it's gonna cost you $2,000 a month because we have no idea.
And that's where what we see is that money is going to ultimately solve the problem, but we want that model where it can be competitively bid in all cases. In my opinion, I don't think it should just be a one-time ask. I think it should be something that's cultivated and managed by an organization that's specialized.
Instead of forming a cooperative, why not just go with Rick's idea and have a pot of money that you as the ISP can borrow from to build out that last mile instead of having all the infrastructure of an entire new cooperative that's gonna cost a ton of money to maintain? Why not just you as the ISP, because you're the only one that's gonna use it. I mean, a whole entire cooperative doesn't need to leverage your one line that's going to this business to.
That'll be an experiment in my mind, because what has happened in the past is that same thing is what I'm saying, is like us as an organization, what may happen, when that money shows up, is a provider that we didn't even know about. And I'm not gonna name names, but there's been wireless providers that have been formed, there's wireless providers that show up from other countries. I mean, they literally will come from everywhere, they'll low-cost bid the project, they'll promise the moon, the money will be obtained, 5 years later they'll be wondering what the heck happened. We won't get it because we're gonna be brutally honest, because we have got to eat our own cooking, per se. That has happened, it happened in every county. The incumbents never got it, as far as I know. I don't think in history the incumbents have gotten the money. So if you have an entity that's a vehicle for that, that's made up of incumbents or bona fide providers that are already providing service, there could be rules of membership, that if you want to participate in this, you need to have been in business 5 years, you need to have existing customers in this footprint, you need to, those could all be, that's part of what I'm conceiving of when I conceive of this nonprofit entity that just has a board, at a minimum is a board of directors that can give the public confidence in how this money is spent. Kind of see what I'm saying, the difference?
I mean, my concerns for you guys is the ISP, because it's all the unknowns you do. You go into this in good faith that somebody wants to buy your service, but they're not going to sign a 5-year deal, which is how long it's going to take you to pay back this infrastructure.
But we do that every day.
So, well, but 2 years later, they move out, they leave, whatever. You don't have service, you can't pay back that money, you know what I mean?
A bigger risk for me is that someone goes in and takes money that we could have used even a small piece to hook up one more customer, and instead they took the whole pot, they spent it on a whole bunch of infrastructure and had no ability to sustain it. That's what I don't want to see happen with this money, and that's what I'm trying to articulate. And to your point, we do that all the time. We go into a neighborhood of 5 homes and we say, here's how much it's going to cost. And I know other providers have done it, and say, all right, in 3 years it's going to be an additional X per month to pay this off, because we know you don't have $1,000 up front to do this. And the next person moves into that house, they get service. We keep charging it. If you want service from us, you're going to have to finish paying for the money we put out to do this. So that can work. That risk we can handle.
I think your point's very valid, that something like an existing ISP should certainly get preferential treatment, just given the fact that they've already invested in the community. I think something like that would be a good bar to set.
And again, we're honest, but I don't want anybody to assume that the pricing that comes forward, like when some companies say it's going to cost $300,000 to build this, is it really? Because maybe it would be better if at each turn there was a little bit of a keep it honest. Just it's me being a good citizen of wanting to see this sustainable and wanting to see it ultimately solve the problem. And so take it for what it's worth, but a membership of like-minded organizations that can solve the problem, and this includes governments, this includes county, because counties are subject to to be elected by their constituents who we're ultimately trying to serve, should have membership on this entity that controls this finances, because they won't get reelected if they spend money that didn't solve the problem in that entity. So they need membership on this board, because they will make sure the money goes to where it's needed, as opposed to putting up 7 towers that covers 60% of the population that already has service, as opposed to microcells that go down a road that's so thickly wooded that they can't get service, and it's too long for a fiber bill. So
that's a good point.
It is the solution, and I know it is, and I'm just waiting for us to get there. I'm waiting for how to actually see it happen.
In the end, if you give a business money, their goal is to keep that money for themselves, be profitable.
There needs to be,
their goal is to, efficiently deliver services, cost effective.
We're here to solve the problem more than we are to make money. Those individual entities that ultimately solve the problem can make the money, but to ensure the outcome, it can't be a profit-minded entity that's to ensure the outcome. And it needs to be quasi-public-private and a cooperative as that entity. But it has to be specialized, and it has to be limited in scope so it doesn't threaten any existing providers either, because it'll never pass, it'll never be formed.
I'm not sure if the state had to do it all over again. They would want to own and maintain a network that they have like this. I mean, several counties have tried it. They're not interested in it. You saw how it's miserably failed. And to that effect, I don't think any of these other counties have any interest in owning, selling, or maintaining fiber.
No.
So, I mean.
But they're not owning, selling, or maintaining it. They're not owning it, so they have representation on the outcome.
I mean, I think the private sector really is the solution with help from the
But they
government.
need oversight and governance and a legal structure to make sure that that's the problem they're solving, and only that problem.
But that's where we need the ISPs to come in and offer us the solutions that best fill those gaps.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, say we had a mid-shore cooperative, Eastern Utilities, Bay Country Communications, Delmarva Wi-Fi, Blue Surf, Atlantic Broadband, all the companies would be a part of this entity that had some level of oversight for the money to make sure it was only going towards these areas, and that when it was built, that there was a payback, and that there was actually a reserve, and there was actually some sort of framework around the solution. See the difference?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I understand.
How many ISPs are in the state?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, gosh.
Well, there's 60 plus, or something. I think there's 70 or something.
You're going to invite all of them to your next meeting?
Hmm?
You're going to invite all of them to your next meeting?
I think just the ones that are.
I couldn't find on the FCC database. There's one in Frederick County called Cellular Network. They're not even registered, but they're out there.
Yeah, there's a million. They're
Yeah,
everywhere.
but there's lots of
FCC
little
is
ones.
not updated, and Maryland Broadband won't give it. We've asked for it.
What are you looking for from them?
All ISPs.
Who-
I mean, that are members?
Yes, they're members.
Well, that's part of the problem, is the members actually have voted to not disclose who their members are. Well, no, the cooperative, I'm sure, would be happy to send out an
not the
invite to anybody
membership.
for anything to their membership. But the memberships themselves, the membership themselves have elected not to make that information public. So unfortunately, when you request something like a membership list, the membership themselves have decided at this point that they don't want to disclose who they are.
I saw that happen, but.
Well, they're all afraid that it'll be used against them,
For
which
what?
is usually what is the case.
They go out
Yeah.
competing with each other, they go after each other's lists.
Well, I'm not sure it's as big an issue now as it was back when it was formed, and that's when that decision was made. I honestly am not sure if you, at the annual meeting, put that to a vote, how many people would actually care anymore? I mean, what's your thoughts, Scott?
We talked about it possibly at this meeting, but I know a couple of years ago, we wanted to even put on the website. And that's when it went out for the vote.
Yeah.
We as directors wanted it on the website,
As the
and
board.
they're the ones that came, the members came back and said, we don't want our names listed on the website.
Right, because that's the board, we literally wanted to list all the members.
Some of them did, and some didn't, a lot didn't.
So, I mean,
What was the reason for not? That's what I
It's
just.
the very reason, as you sit in these meetings, and Comcast and Verizon are sitting there driving these meetings behind the scenes, that they're trying to, who's the most vocal person that's in any of your meetings here? Your boss, in all fairness, Department of Commerce, and Comcast. Sean's very good at what he does, I think he's
That's
great,
right,
but
absolutely.
that's what he gets paid to do. He's more vocal than Brian, and Brian's an exception to the rule. And I work with Brian, but you know, I'm just being honest, and I think the world a big country, worked with him for 12 years. But those are the people that are, and they're the same ones that'll tell you, those type of people that are in the co-op members of the Maryland Broadband are the same way. They're very protective of their,
Yeah,
you know, right? I mean,
I've never fully understood the real reason behind it, not wanting to.
There's a scenario where you could ask like a co-op to send an email to its membership saying.
We
have
did do
this
that,
event."
right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the
You're
other,
not talking about banning everyone, you're just talking about banning.
No,
just
but
the people that have been involved.
Well, the ones
Right.
that are on the task force, the ISPs, yeah.
We've got a good mix of big and small.
Yeah.
you know.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's one of the things with a co-op, generally, it's not just the co-op driving things, there's oftentimes member-to-member benefits, so, you know, one company would share with another company, and that could be part of the reason that you don't necessarily wanna have your name up there, because I don't know how many private companies are doing horse trading with a Verizon, or, you know,
Exactly.
and as part of a co-op, that's one of the things you're kind of expected to do, I think, but.
Okay.
And in all fairness, I find it fascinating because being a customer, not anymore, but for years growing up with Chop Tank Electric, I think the world of them. But let's be honest, they don't share, you know, when I hear this stuff about sharing profits, I know my mom was a member for 29 years. The minute she saw the profit was when she moved out of state, she had to go take care of her mother, and then she got a $20-some check, you know, to share the profits that she had paid in all the time. That's, you know, we can sit here and talk about all these are great, these co-op things.
Yeah.
Even in the electric business in the Southern Maryland, they're in to make money, I mean, yes, they're nonprofits, but they're in there to maintain.
Yeah.
And it's not like they sit there and, you know, just like Eastern Utilities competes with Chop Tank, but it's not like their electric bills are that different. You know, they're all businesses, I mean,
They are.
they're there for a reason. I mean, I'm not negative to them, it's,
Well,
but it's not.
and the main
utopia.
reason they were there, whether it's the broadband cooperative or the electric cooperative, was to continue to expand their footprint so they
Absolutely.
need them. So
And you're reinvesting.
you're constantly reinvesting your funds back into your network to expand it, and that's.
Absolutely.
That was one of the things when we initially started doing things with the state and grants and things like that, people were like, well, you know, you've got money. It's like, well, yeah, we do, but we just keep building things out. I mean, it's not like you're sitting there. In fact, you know, as a 501c3, you're prohibited from sitting on so much money. You don't have a choice. You've got to have a plan to reinvest and redevelop this stuff.
There's reason Chop Tank put fiber in the ground to monitor their stuff, not have the guy walk by your street.
That's right.
Every month.
That's right.
In all fairness.
Yep.
Or call it in.
Hey, I've
Call it in
learned,
as a customer.
I've learned a lot sitting on those different boards about what the regulations are, and I've learned more and more and more that as government, I want nothing to do with it.
Well, would you like to see a skeleton, like in writing, of what this could look like?
Yeah.
Be great, yeah.
I mean, even more than one different option if that's what you have.
I'd love to see the idea that Addie said about the authority to it.
Yeah, I'm
Concept.
gonna, he offered to come and talk, he just couldn't make this date or the October date. The Eastern Shore Regional Broadband Authority is operating, but I asked if he could send a representative to the next meeting. So we'll see, I'll look at hhis statute and see how they're organized.
It's in Virginia, you said?
Yeah, Northampton, yeah, it was created by counties. All right, well, looks like we're at the end of our,
It's actually created by the state, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Except Virginia
This is by
State.
county, yeah.
It's not perfect either, but then again, we can learn from it, absolutely. Just like
It needs to look at the model.
it would be, absolutely, absolutely.
Charlotte, I had one thing, the state agencies and that permitting, the document that went out in August, DNR did receive comments from Crown Castle Fiber, Maryland DC Wireless Association, Mako, Rick Wharton, and Charles County IT. So they are working on those edits, and on the 15th will be on the DNR website, and they're gonna keep that updated on an annual basis. But this is to help reduce public right-of-ways, public lands, a new system on trying to get those permits. And so it's all focused on the ISPs, which is why we were trying to get all of their names, so that they're aware of this new process that should be expediting the permit process. So we'll get that to you, and we'll get it to the co-op to get to their ISPs.
It's a good time to do it, because the annual meeting's coming up.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a great time to do it, to get it to Maryland Broadband. It's a
Yeah,
great
so
time.
it should be up by, October 15-ish, so, yeah.
And you got 3 board members here that would be encouraged.
Absolutely.
It's
Take a
right
look
here.
at it.
All right, well, we'll send all, thank you all for your conversation and your suggestions. We'll start integrating into this report. We'll send this draft report out ASAP, because you guys just got it, and it's just draft, so any suggestions.
But we're still ahead of last year, so that's
Yes,
good.
yeah, actually, we
Okay.
are. And then, any suggestions, ideas, so on?
And you're gonna circle around and possibly changing that meeting so the
Yes.
ISPs can make it?
Yeah, because we need the others too. So, yeah, I guess ignore that invite. We'll look for a new date, probably, I guess, the 26th, or is that, the next, probably next week.
People be driving back.
Yeah.
Back that day.
I mean, this probably should have been done a long time ago, but it would be nice if each one of us in our own jurisdiction or backyard could go to a couple of our ISPs and say, what would make a difference to get here? I mean, what is it that we as the government, whether is it money, is it regulation, is it right away, what would make that difference and bring that back? Because, I mean, I don't know that we ever actually did that. Maybe that was our mistake.
An oversight.
But I'm wondering, well, we had a lot of those people in the meetings, and I'm just not sure.
Early on, that was a lot of last year's conversation, was that access to rights of way,
Right.
permitting, and
But I just feel like there's little things that would make a bigger difference that never really necessarily came out.
what I hear from all the ISPs is just give us money.
I will.
When I've asked them that, that's literally the answer.
What they
Yeah.
say?
When I ask them, what's the barrier for you to come into these areas, it's money,
Yeah.
just pay us, just give us the subsidy, we need help.
Right. Well, one of the things that drives us nuts though is the fact that there's areas the cooperative has fiber into. So it's not an issue of give us money so we can get there. It's we want to own our own fiber getting into there.
Yeah.
And that's one of the issues that I really dislike, and I want to make sure we don't overbuild these things, because if somebody wants to get in there, we shouldn't be overbuilding. We somehow need to make them understand that there's fiber there that they have access to that will get them there.
Well, that was part of my thought with the discussion today. If we were able to take that even as a first step and be able to access that right away or that conduit, then see how many new subscribers come on board, because we know not everybody's going to jump on board if you take it to a place where there's not a demand.
Right.
So if there already is existing demand and you have a way to flesh that out that's low cost, do it. And then see what else needs to be done. Because I think the demand will get created as you increase accessibility and satisfy demand where there is one already, was my thinking.
And I couldn't encourage us enough to really stress in whatever email you send out to encourage the ISPs to be at the next meeting.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that, not many showed up today. I'm not being smart, I'm just being, it's just being realistic.
Well, we don't know how many people are watching this on.
I'm still saying, if it's your business, and I'm not saying, and I'm not saying that they're small, but I know some that, personally, I knew some ISPs that said, I'm just not driving out there.
Sure.
That are large enough to do it. That's a small one and they drove out.
Oh, I know.
But my point is, we tend to get around a table, and God knows Senator Eckert's been working on this before I was ever around. And I'm sure Senator Edwards, I'm sure it was too, but we were talking about this years ago. There's been those of us that sit around this table enough that we hear the same stuff, but it's one thing for us to say it, but whatever recommendations come out, we really need to need to hear them of what they're recommending in a month. And not saying, oh great, that sounds good, but what we think is like this, because they're the ones that are ultimately gonna have to execute it.
Right.
And I mean, we really need to hear them next month and going, okay, this is real, it's not what we all think or what we thought 20 years ago or 10. We need their input to know that, like you said, is it just money? I mean, in all fairness, that's what they tell you.
But that's where
That's what they're telling
if it's not coming from them,
That's
I
what I mean.
figure it has a far better chance of being implemented if it's something that they feel like is the impediment.
Exactly.
And that's why I think if we stress that please come, this is the meeting, you've invested a year coming, listening, but please be there in person to.
I want to point out though that a lot of the big ISPs, what they want is completely different what the small ones need.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
listening to these guys is going to be, some of them are going to say this, and some are going to say this, and I think we probably need to do both.
Yeah,
Absolutely. You're right.
I envision there's gonna be two solutions for two different groups. I'm 100% with you. I agree wholeheartedly that what the big guy wants is
Totally different.
You're right.
than what- Yeah.
I just want.
All right, well, great conversation. Think about ideas, recommendations, let me know. We'll be sending this all out in email, and everybody have a safe trip home.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.